"Drive on," the Duke of Dunmere said, and then before the coachman's whip could lift, "No, stop." The carriage halted so sharply that the near horse skidded on the flooded road, and the lamps swung, and their light went sliding out across the ditch, and the dry stone wall, and the gate of Vale House, where a young woman stood in the freezing rain with a bandbox in her arms and no bonnet on her head. She was not sheltering. That was the thing that had made him speak. Ambrose Carow had passed 100 wet figures on 100 wet roads in his life, and had never once thought them his business. But this one was standing straight in the middle of the open gateway, with the rain coming down like nails, making no attempt whatever to get out of it, as though the weather were a person she refused to give ground to. Behind her, the door of the house stood open, and a woman in dry silk stood in the light of it. "And do not come whining to the kitchen door either," that woman was saying, in the carrying voice of somebody who wished to be heard as far as the road. "Fenna, the bolt, the top bolt as well. Miss Vale has chosen her road, let her walk it." The door shut. The light went out of the gravel, and the young woman in the gateway turned her face up into the rain for a moment, the way a person does when there is no one left to see them do it, and then began to walk. Ambrose watched her come on down the road toward him. She had a shawl over a gray gown, and both were black with water. Her boots were wrong for the weather. The bandbox she carried was tied with tape, and she carried it the way a woman carries a sleeping thing. "Your Grace," said Halloway from the opposite seat low, "it is nearly 10, if we are to reach the Abbey before the ford at Sedge." "Yes," Ambrose said, and opened the door and stepped down into 6 inches of running water. She stopped when she saw him. In the carriage lamps her face was very white and very young and entirely composed, and her eyes went over him once, the greatcoat, the boots, the arms of Dunmere on the panel behind him, and he watched something in her go still and careful, the way a hunted creature goes still. "The road is under water at Sedge Bridge," he said. "You cannot walk it." "Then it is fortunate that I am not going to Sedge." Her teeth were chattering. She said it perfectly clearly all the same. "Where are you going?" "To Kirkby Marle. There is a coach from the Fleece at 6 in the morning." "Kirkby Marle is 9 miles. "Yes," she agreed. The rain ran off the brim of his hat and off the ends of her hair. Somewhere behind the wall, a beck that had been a trickle that afternoon was going over its stones with a sound like a crowd. "Get in," Ambrose said. "No," she said, "thank you." He had been refused perhaps 4 times in his adult life, and never by anyone standing in a ditch. For a moment, he could think of nothing at all to say to it. "You have been turned out of that house," he said at last. "I have left it. With a bandbox and no bonnet, at 10 at night in February." "With a bandbox," she said, "and no bonnet. Yes." And then, with the first crack in that flat courtesy, "Sir, if you are kind, be kind and drive on. If you are not kind, drive on quicker. A carriage stopped at that gate for a quarter of an hour will be talked of in Nether Sedge by Tuesday, and I have nothing left in the world but the fact that nobody can say anything of me that is true." Ambrose Carow had buried a father, a brother, and a wife he had never loved, and had been called the coldest man in the North Riding by people who meant it as a compliment. He was not accustomed to being instructed in the mechanics of ruin by a girl with water in her shoes. "Halloway," he said, without turning his head, "get out, walk the horses to the top of the rise and wait." "Your Grace." "Now, if you please." Halloway got out, and the carriage moved off up the hill, and its light went with it, and the two of them were left in the black road with the rain and the noise of the beck. "There," Ambrose said, "no carriage stands at the gate. Now, madam, you are Miss Vale. Clemency Vale. Then you are Bartholomew Vale's daughter. He was a good man about a boundary and an obstinate man about everything else, and he lent me a book on the drainage of clay soils 11 years ago which he never got back and never let me forget. I was sorry to hear he died. He paused. That was his widow at the door. His widow, she said. Yes. On what grounds? She did not answer. Her chin came up half an inch. Miss Vale, I am standing in a flooded road in the dark, at some cost to my temper and my boots. Answer the question, or begin your 9 miles. She says I stole a brooch, Clemency Vale said. Did you? It was my mother's. That is not the same answer. No, she said, it is a better one. And there, for one heartbeat, in the pitch dark, with her voice shaking from cold, he heard something under the courtesy that was not frightened at all. It was anger, and it was in beautiful order, like a room with the furniture straight in it. Ambrose found, to his considerable irritation, that he was interested. There is an inn at Nether Sedge, he said. The Marl Arms. The woman who keeps it is Susan Tibb, and she was my mother's dairymaid, and she has a private parlor with a fire in it and a chamber over the porch with a good lock on the door. Understand me. I will not take you to Dunmere. You are right about the talk, and I have a young person in my house whose name is worth more than my convenience. You will go to Susan Tibb's, tonight, in my carriage, with my steward walking beside it in the rain like a fool, which will look so peculiar that nobody will be able to make a scandal of it. And in the morning you will tell me the whole of it, and then you will do exactly as you like. There was a long silence. Why, she said. Because your father lent me a book, Ambrose said, and I dislike an unpaid debt. He heard her draw a breath to refuse, and heard the refusal not come, and understood that she was much colder than she had allowed him to see. When he put out his hand for the bandbox, she gave it to him, and her fingers were so stiff that she could not properly let go of the tape, and he had to take it out of her grip like a splinter. There is nothing in it worth stealing, she said, with what was almost humor. A shift, 2 books, and a paper. Then we shall guard the paper, said the Duke of Dunmere, and whistled for his carriage. Susan Tibb was 61 years old, 4 feet 11 inches high, and afraid of nobody living. She took one look at what came in out of the rain, said, Well, and here's a state, and had Clemency Vale out of the room and up the stairs before Ambrose had got his hat off. He stood in the flagged passage of the Marl Arms and dripped. Your Grace will take something, said Tibb's husband, hovering. Brandy for Halloway. He has walked 1.5 miles to preserve a young woman's character, and does not yet know it. Ambrose put his gloves down on the settle. They made a sound like dead birds. And send up whatever your wife asks for and put it on my account, and if any person in this house repeats 1 word of tonight in the village, I shall know it by Thursday, and they will be looking for a place by Friday. Nobody here talks, your Grace, said Tibb, wounded. Everybody everywhere talks, said Ambrose. It is the great constant of the county. He did not go home. He told himself that this was because the ford at Sedge would be running 4 feet deep by now, and it would be idiotic to try it, which was true. And he took the 2nd chamber and lay in a bed too short for him, listening to the rain come off the eaves in ropes, and thinking about the sound of a top bolt going home. He was 38 years old. He had held the dukedom for 6 years, since the accident in Rowland's flooded shaft at Sedge Head that he had been paying for ever since in ways that could not be written in a ledger, though he had also paid a great deal that could. He had a niece of 17 in his house who coughed all winter and was afraid of him, an estate of 11,000 acres, a slate quarry, a lime works, 400 tenants, a chapel with his family lying under the floor of it, and a reputation as a man who had never in his life done a warm thing without an account of it being kept. He thought she stood in the middle of the gateway. She did not stand at the side. In the morning it was still raining, and the whole of the low ground toward Sedge had turned into a gray lake with hedge-tops in it. And Miss Clemency Vale came down to the private parlor at 8 o'clock in a borrowed gown of Susan Tibbs that was 3 inches too short, with her hair braided and pinned and her hands folded, and looked at him. By daylight she was not the drowned creature of the road. She was perhaps 4 or 5 and 20, brown-haired, with a wide, clear forehead and a mouth that held itself. Not a beauty by the standards of the Haricot Assembly Rooms, where beauty was reckoned in inches of eyelash, but with a face a man might look at for a long time without getting to the end of it. Her eyes were gray and steady, and they did not drop when he looked at her, which almost nobody's did. "You are not dead of a chill," Ambrose said. "Good, sit down and eat something." "Your Grace, I owe you." "You owe me a plate of ham. Sit." She sat and ate, and he was pleased to see that she ate properly, without the fluttering nonsense of a woman pretending she does not require food. When she had done, he pushed the coffee toward her and folded his arms. "Now," he said, "from the beginning and no delicacy. Delicacy wastes the morning." "You will not like it." "I have not liked anything since 1811. Begin." She looked into the fire for a moment, and then began, in the plainest voice in the world, and he sat back and listened, and in 11 minutes she laid before him the neatest small atrocity he had come across in years. Her mother had been Anne Sedgewater of Sedgewater Home, and had brought to her marriage a settlement, 412 acres of water meadow, and the lime kilns at Fell Foot, held in trust for herself and afterwards for the children of her body. Her mother had died when Clemency was 9. Her father had married again 8 years later, Sabra Pry, sister to Sir Osric Pry of Haricot, a handsome woman of 30 with a taste for a carriage and no money to keep one. He was lonely, Clemency said. He was not a fool, but he was lonely, and there is no arithmetic for that. Bartholomew Vale had died 18 months ago. Under the trust, the Sedgewater lands came to his daughter absolutely on her 25th birthday, which had fallen in November. Under his will, his widow had the house at Vale for her life, and 300 a year. 300 a year, Ambrose said. And what does she spend? 900, said Clemency Vale. Perhaps 1,000. There is a great deal of wine. And the meadows. For the first time, something went out of her face. That is the paper in my bandbox, she said. In September I asked Mr. Dowd. He was my father's attorney, and is now hers for the rentroll of Sedgewater and the account of the kilns since my father's death. He put me off 4 times. In November, on my birthday, I asked again, and was told to apply to my stepmother, who told me that a young woman of no experience could not be plagued with business, and that all was arranged. And in December a man came to Vale House about a fence at Fell Foot, and I signed his receipt for him because there was nobody else in the house to do it, and he called me by mistake, and then he was very frightened. He called me the tenant's daughter, Your Grace. He said, we had understood the home lands were Mr. Dowd's now, or as good as. Ambrose said nothing. So I went a Kirkby Marl on the carrier's cart, and paid 1 and 3pence I could not spare, and looked at the registry of deeds. And there is a mortgage upon Sedgewater Home and the kilns for £2,300, dated the March after my father died, in favor of Mr. Kestrel Dowd, attorney, of Haricot. She lifted her eyes. Executed by my stepmother as guardian of my interest, which she never was, under a power my father never gave her, and witnessed by her brother, who is a magistrate of this county, and sat in judgment last Michaelmas on a boy who took a hare. You have the office copy. I could not afford the office copy. I have the memorandum I made of it in my own hand, and the clerk's initials at the foot where he certified I had copied it true, because I asked him to, and he thought me mad. You are not mad, Ambrose said slowly. You are the only person in this story who has done anything sensible. What did they do when you put this to them? I did not put it to them at first, she said. I wrote to a London firm my father once used. The letter went into the bag at Vale House, because there is no other way for a letter to go. 9 days later Mr. Dowd came to dinner and was very kind to me, and said that a lady of my years should be settled, and that he was a plain man of business, but a warm heart, and that if I were his wife, all these tiresome papers would be in one pair of hands, and no more need be said. Ambrose put down his cup. He offered for you 3 times. Yesterday for the 3rd time in the small parlor, with my stepmother listening at the door, and when I said no for the 3rd time, he stopped being kind. Her voice did not change at all. He said that a girl who had been alone in a house with a man who had made her an offer and refused it would find that the world thought she had a reason to refuse it, and that reasons of that kind ruin a woman. And then my stepmother came in and looked in my workbox and found my mother's brooch, which I have worn every Sunday of my life, and said that it was hers, out of the plate chest, and that she had suspected me since Christmas, and put you into the road in the rain. She gave me leave to go to my room and write a letter withdrawing my refusal, Clemency said. I did not care to write it. The fire settled. Out in the yard a horse stamped and somebody swore at it comfortably. Ambrose Carew discovered that he had risen and gone to the window, which was not a thing he did, and that his hands were behind his back and closed hard. He had spent 6 years learning what happens to people who have no one to speak for them. He had learnt it in a flooded shaft, standing in water to his thighs, holding a lantern over the face of his own brother, who had told him 3 times in writing that Sedgehead wanted a pumping engine, and had been told 3 times that the estate could not spare £800 that year. He had spared the £800 4 months after the funeral. Everybody in the North Riding thought him a hard man. Only Ambrose knew he was a man who had learnt, too late, exactly what a delay costs, and who could not any longer sit still and watch a slow thing be done to somebody. Miss Vale, he said to the window, what did you mean to do at Kirkby Marle? Take the coach to Leeds. There is a woman there, a Mrs. Ivory, who my father's cousin knew, who places gentlewomen as companions. I read and write a fair hand. I keep an account. I speak enough French to be laughed at, and I know more of physic and the still-room than any woman in this parish, because my mother taught me and my father's tenants had nobody else. She stopped. I know what a companion's place is. I would rather be a servant than be Mr. Dowd's wife, and I would rather be dead in a ditch than be either without having tried the law first, and I cannot try the law, because the law costs money, and every shilling I own is in that mortgage. How much have you? £4.11, and a mare that is not mine to sell. And against you, an attorney, a magistrate, and your father's widow. Yes. You know that you will lose. I know that I have not lost yet, said Clemency Vale. Ambrose turned round. She was sitting very upright in Susan Tibbs' too-short gown with her hands in her lap, and she was frightened. He could see it now that he was looking for it, in the way her thumb pressed the knuckle of her other hand, and she was going to go to Leeds on the 6 o'clock coach with £4.11, and she was not going to ask him for anything. She had not asked him for one thing since the gateway. Not for money, not for a lawyer, not for the loan of his name. She had told him the story because he had ordered her to, and she was now waiting, courteously, to be dismissed. Something in the Duke of Dunmere, which had been shut for a long time and had rusted shut, moved on its hinge. "There is a difficulty at Dunmere," he said. Clemency blinked. "Your Grace." "My niece is 17. Orla Caro, my brother's daughter. She has been my ward 6 years, and she coughs from October to May, and the Haricot physician bleeds her, and she has had 4 companions who left because the abbey is cold and I am worse. She has no mother, and I am a poor substitute. When I come into a room, she puts down whatever she is holding and waits for me to find fault with it, and I have never once found fault with it, and she waits all the same." He said it evenly, as a man reads out a list of defects in a drain. "My still-room has been locked since my mother died. My housekeeper thinks physic is popery. There is a fever every spring in the quarry cottages at Sedge Head, and the nearest surgeon is at Kirkby Marl, 8 miles, and charges £half-a-crown to come, which a quarryman earns in a day and a half." He watched her understand, and he watched her refuse to hope, which she did well. "You are offering me a place." "I am offering you employment," said Ambrose, "at £40 a year, which is what my mother paid her still-room woman, and is more than a companion is paid, because you will be both, and I do not care for bargains. You will live in the West Range with your own door and your own key. You will keep the still-room, physic the tenants, and sit with Orlia, and you will not be a servant in my house. You will be Miss Vale, who has charge of the still-room, and the first person who says otherwise within my hearing will find the county a smaller place than they supposed." He paused. "And you will give me that memorandum in your bandbox, and I shall send it to my own attorneys in York, who have been robbing me competently for 20 years, and will enjoy the change of robbing somebody else." The rain went across the window in a long handful. "Your Grace," Clemency said, and her voice was not steady, "if I go into your house, they will say what Mr. Dowd said. They will say it of you, and they will say it of me, and mine is the one that breaks." "Then we will make it very difficult to say," said Ambrose. "You will be engaged by letter, through Halloway, in the ordinary way, and the letter will be dated and copied. You will be met at the door by my housekeeper, and not by me. Susan Tibb will tell the village, she will tell them by dinner-time, she will not be able to help herself, that the Duke's steward hired Bartholomew Vale's daughter for the still-room, because the old Duchess's receipts were going to ruin, and that his Grace walked his horses a mile in the rain sooner than have a young woman in his carriage. Half the parish will call me mad. Nobody at all will call me anything worse, because nobody who has ever met me believes me capable of a passion." His mouth moved very slightly. "It is the one advantage of the character I have." She looked at him for a long moment, and he had the uncomfortable sense of being read by somebody with better eyes than his own. "And when the mortgage is enforced," she said, "and there is a suit, and my stepmother's brother sits on the bench, and Mr. Dowd tells the county that I have got myself into a duke's house, what then?" "Then," Ambrose said, "they will discover what a duke is for." Dunmere Abbey stood in a fold of the moor where a river came down out of the fells and slowed and turned, and had been an abbey for 300 years and a house for 300 more, and had the look of a place that had made its peace with rain. Its walls were the color of wet slate. Its windows were long and narrow and would not shut. In the great hall the Caro arms were carved 11 times in stone, and under the chapel floor lay 400 years of Caros, including, in the newest slab, ROWLAND Edmund KERROW, 5th Duke of DUNMERE, and under that only the dates. Ambrose came in at 4 o'clock in the afternoon, 3 days after the rain, and Mrs. Pardew met him in the hall with her keys in her hands, and her mouth pressed into the shape of a woman who has been up all night composing a speech. "Your Grace, the person has come." "Miss Vale has come," said Ambrose. You will find, Mrs. Pardew, that persons who are called persons become persons. Where is she? In the still room, your grace. Where else? And I will say this, and then I have done. That room has been locked 11 years, and there is a reason for it. And I have had the girls scrub it 3 times, and the smell of it is not a wholesome smell. And I do not hold with brewing. My mother's sister took a purge of a woman like that in Ripon, and was carried off in a fortnight. Then your mother's sister should have taken less of it, said Ambrose, and went to look. The still room lay at the end of the west range, stone-floored, northlit, with a range at one end, and a copper and shelves from floor to ceiling, and on those shelves 11 years of dust in the shapes of jars. When he was a boy, this room had smelt of lemon balm and hot sugar, and had been the only warm room in the abbey, and his mother had sat in it with her sleeves rolled to the elbow, which no other soul in England had ever seen. Miss Clemency Vale was up a ladder, with a duster tied round her head like a sailor. "Your Grace," she said, coming down without haste, 206 jars, 91 still good, 41 turned, and the rest are gum arabic and camphor, and things which do not care how long they wait. There is a book here in a hand I do not know. My mother's. She stopped. Then I will not use it without leave. Use it, Ambrose said. That is what it is. She would have thought a locked still room the greatest waste in the house, and she would have been right, and I am the one who locked it. He looked at the shelves and not at her. Sentiment, Miss Vale, is very expensive. What do you want? Sugar, said Clemency, in quantity. 6 pounds of honey. 2 dozen bottles. Leave to have the fire lit in here every day, not every 3rd day. Leave to go into the village on foot without asking each time. And a key to the door which I have, and a bolt on the inside of it which I have not. Halloway will see to the bolt today. Anything else? She hesitated for the first time. Your niece has been to see me twice, she said, and both times she got as far as the door and went away again. Ambrose said nothing for a moment. Something turned over in his chest that he did not like the feel of. She is timid. She is lonely, said Clemency Vale, which is a different complaint and wants a different physic. He went up to the long gallery that evening, where Aurelia sat with a fire and a shawl, and a book she was not reading, and he stood in the doorway and watched his brother's daughter put the book down on her knee and fold her hands and wait, exactly as she always did, for whatever was going to be found fault with. She had Roland's coloring and Roland's chin, and a cough that had been in her since the year of the accident. And Ambrose had spent 6 years being unable to say a single true thing to her. Aurelia. Uncle. You went twice to the still room and did not go in. Her chin came up, the Caro chin, useless in a girl of 17 and beautiful all the same. Mrs. Pardew says she is a person of no character who has imposed upon you. Mrs. Pardew, Ambrose said, has been imposing upon this family since 1794, chiefly in the matter of candles. He came in and sat down across the fire from her, which he could not remember doing since she was 11. Miss Vale's father was a gentleman of this parish. Her mother's family held Sedgewater Home for 200 years. Her stepmother put her out of doors in February rain over a brooch that belonged to her own mother, in order to frighten her into marrying an attorney who has stolen her land. That is her character. Mrs. Pardew may have the rest of the story on Sunday, and she may have it from me. Aurelia's eyes had gone very wide. In the rain. On the Kirkby Road. She meant to walk 9 miles and take a coach to Leeds with £4 11 shillings. He put his hands on the arms of the chair. She knows more of physic than the man who bleeds you. She is 25 years old and she has nobody in the world. and you are 17 and have nobody either except an uncle who frightens you, and I have not the smallest notion how to mend that, so I have brought somebody into the house who might." There was a silence in the long gallery. The fire spat. "You do not frighten me," said Caro in a very small voice, "so very much." "That is the worst compliment I have ever been paid," said Ambrose, "and I shall keep it." She laughed, a startled, unpracticed sound that turned into a cough, and he sat and waited it out with his jaw set. And when it was over, she wiped her eyes and looked at him with something new in her face. "May I go to the stillroom tomorrow?" "You may go tonight," said her uncle, "and take her the honey, and tell Mrs. Pardew I said so, and do not let her make you stand in the passage arguing about it, because that is what she wants." Within a fortnight, the whole ordering of the abbey had shifted a quarter turn, the way a house does when one true thing is let into it. Caro was in the still-room every morning from 10 until 2, with her sleeves pinned back, learning to strain a syrup through flannel, and to write a label in a round hand, and she coughed less. And Ambrose could not say whether that was the elecampane and the horehound and the black currant lozenges, or whether it was the simple animal fact of a girl with something to do and somebody to do it with. He suspected it was the second. He was careful never to say so, because Clemency Vale had a look she used on flattery, a dry sideways look, like a woman finding a moth in a drawer. By the third week, the tenants had begun to come. They came first to the kitchen door, because that is how tenants come, and Clemency sent word to Halloway that the kitchen door was inconvenient, and could she have the old porter's lodge by the west arch on Wednesdays? And Halloway came to Ambrose, and Ambrose said yes. And after that, on a Wednesday, there were 7 women and a boy sitting on the bench in the west arch out of the wind. And by the 6th Wednesday, there were 19, from as far as Fell Foot. And the Duke of Dunmere stood at a window of the muniment room with a lease in his hand, and watched them for a quarter of an hour without reading a word of it. She did not physic them for nothing, he discovered. She charged a penny. "A penny," he repeated. "A penny," said Clemency, "for a bottle that costs me a farthing and a penny for the next, and if they cannot pay the penny they may bring me eggs or a bundle of comfrey out of the hedge or nothing at all, and nobody is told which they did." She was labeling bottles. She did not look up. "If it is free, your grace, it is charity, and half of them will not come, because they are proud, and the half who do come will be despised by the other half. If it is a penny it is a bargain, and there is no shame in a bargain. My mother taught me that, and she was right about it for 16 years. You are a formidable woman of business." "I have £5.9 in a jar," said Clemency Vale, "and it is the first money I have ever had that was mine. Do not laugh at me." "I am not laughing," said Ambrose, and found that this was so. It was in the 4th week that Mrs. Pardew came to him, white about the mouth, with the news that there was fever at Sedge Head. And it was in the 4th week that he learnt what Miss Vale was when the ground shook. Fever in the quarry cottages was an annual thing. 3 or 4 would die, and 11 or 12 would be ill, and the works would stand half idle for a month, and Ambrose would send money and coals and be thanked for it, and it would happen again the next spring. This year it began in the 2nd row of cottages, and by the Tuesday there were 9 down with it, and on the Wednesday the quarry captain's wife, Mary Alsop, was taken, and Mary Alsop was 7 months gone with a child. Clemency Vale came to the muniment room at 8 in the morning, in her bonnet, with a basket. "I am going to Sedge Head." Ambrose put down his pen. "There is a fever at Sedge Head." "Yes," she said, "that is the reason." "Miss Vale." "Your Grace, I have 3 hours before it is worth going, because they will not admit me until Mrs. Kell has failed, and Mrs. Kell will have failed by 11. It is a spotted fever, and it goes through a row of houses by the water, and the well at the second row is 9 feet from the privy, and has been since your grandfather sank it. I want lime, and I want the well at the second row shut, and a cart to bring water from the spring at Fellfoot twice a day. And I want the 8 healthy families out of the second row and into the long barn with straw and braziers, and I want it today. And only you can do any of that, and if you will not do it, I am going anyway with what I can carry. Ambrose looked at her for 4 seconds. Holloway, he said, without raising his voice, and Holloway came in from the next room, having plainly been listening at the door. The long barn at Sedgehead, straw, braziers, and Miss Vale's list. Shut the second row well and set a man on it, because they will drink from it out of habit. 2 water carts, lime, quicklime, and every blanket in the store. He stood. And my horse. Your Grace's horse. They will not turn 8 families out of their houses because a steward asks them, said Ambrose. They will do it because I stand in the road while it is done. Miss Vale, you will ride in the cart, because you will not walk 4 miles and then be of any use, and you will do as you are told in the matter of the cart, if in nothing else. She opened her mouth and shut it again. Thank you, she said. He was in the road at Sedgehead for 9 hours that day, and for 6 the next, and he had not worked so hard since the year he came into the title. He stood at the mouth of the second row while Holloway's men carried out a bedstead, and a woman screamed at him that her mother had died in that house. And he said, Madam, and your children will not. And she called him a hard devil, and he said yes, and had the bedstead carried to the barn. And in the cottage at the end of the row, with the door open for air and a sheet hung across it, Clemency Vale worked. He saw her at intervals across those 2 days, and he built up the picture the way a man builds a wall. He saw her come out to the water cart with her sleeves wet to the shoulder and her hair coming down, and drink 2 cups of water straight off and go back in. He saw her sit down on the step at 4 in the afternoon for exactly as long as it took to eat a piece of bread. He saw her at 11 at night with a lantern, showing a 14-year-old girl how to raise her father's head so that he could drink, telling her, in that flat, clear voice, that she was doing it very well, that she must not be afraid of the smell, that the smell was only the fever leaving, and the fever went out through the skin. He saw her lose one, an old man in the 4th house on the Friday morning, and Ambrose, coming up the row, saw her come out of the door and stop, and stand with her hand flat on the wall of the cottage and her head down, quite still, for perhaps 8 seconds. Then she straightened up and went into the next house. Ambrose Carew went home that night and sat in the muniment room without a candle for a long time, thinking about 8 seconds, and about the fact that in 6 years of doing his duty to the letter, he had never once known how to spend 8 seconds against a wall and then go into the next house. On the 11th day the fever stopped. 26 had had it. 4 had died, and one of those was 90, and one had been dying since Christmas of something else. In the spring before, in the same row, with the same coals and the same money and no Clemency Vale, the number had been 11. And Mary Alsop's child was born alive on a wet Sunday in the long barn with straw down and braziers going, and both of them lived, and the quarry captain of Sedgehead, a man built like a gatepost who had once told the 5th Duke of Dunmere to his face what he thought of him, walked 4 miles to the Abbey with his hat in his hands to say a thing he had not the words for, and got as far as Your Grace, and then stood there. Yes, said Ambrose, yes, Alsop, she did. They're saying in the village, said Alsop, as she was put out of her own house in the rain. Is it true, Your Grace? It is true. Alsop turned his hat round twice. "Then them as put her out," he said, "wants telling that Sedgehead knows their names." Ambrose did not answer that, because there is no answer to it that a duke may give aloud and remain a duke. But he thought about it a great deal afterward. He thought about it because it was the first evidence, and he had been waiting for evidence, that the county might in the end be a court in which Clemency Vale could win. The other kind of evidence arrived 9 days later, in an envelope from York. Messrs. Turnwell and Bray, having been robbing the Carrows competently for 20 years, had gone at the business with a will. Ambrose read the letter twice through, and then sent for Clemency, and then, because he did not trust himself to say it properly, gave her the letter. She read it standing at the window in the muniment room with the March light on her, and he watched her face. "They have the office copy," she said. "They have 3 things," said Ambrose. "Read the second page." The mortgage was as she had said, £2,300, dated the 14th of March, on Sedgewater Home and the Fell Foot Kilns, executed by Sabra Vale, widow, professing to act under a power of attorney from her late husband, dated the 2nd of January of that year, 3 weeks before Bartholomew Vale died. "My father could not hold a pen in January," Clemency said. "He had a seizure at Martinmas and his right hand was dead. He signed nothing after that. Nothing." Turnwell says the same, in the driest possible language. He says a power of attorney executed 3 weeks before a man's death, by a man who could not write, granting a general authority over trust property to a woman who was not a trustee, is what he calls in his letter an uncommon instrument. Ambrose leaned back. "It is not, however, a forgery he can presently prove, because the 2 witnesses to it are Mr. Kestrel Dowd's own clerk and a man named Pether who is dead, and the mark upon it is a mark and not a signature, and a mark can be made by any hand at all if a helpful person guides it. Then it stands. For the moment it stands, but note the third thing." He tapped the page. £2,300 was advanced. "Where is it? It did not go to your father who was dead. It did not go into the trust because there is no trust account. Turnwell has looked. Miss Vale, if that money was advanced by Mr. Dowd upon your land, then either Mr. Dowd has lent £2,300 to your stepmother, in which case she owes it, and it is a debt and not a purchase, or no money passed at all, and the mortgage was made to put your inheritance quietly into an attorney's pocket, in which case it is a fraud, and I will have his gown off his back in front of the whole county." Clemency Vale sat down slowly in the chair opposite him, still holding the letter. "There is a great deal of wine at Vale House," she said, "and a new carriage, and my stepmother went to Harrogate in September for 9 weeks and took 2 servants." "Yes," said Ambrose, "I thought of the carriage too." She raised her eyes to him, and for the first time since the gateway there was something in her face that had let go of its guard, and it undid him rather badly. "Your Grace," she said, "why are you doing this? You will recall a book on the drainage of clay soils." "No," said Clemency. "That did for the first night. It will not do for York attorneys at 9 guineas a letter." Ambrose Carew got up and went to the window and looked out at the wet park and the beck and the fell beyond it, and did not turn round, because a man who has been called the coldest in the North Riding must be allowed the small cowardice of a window. "Because I once had 3 letters from my brother about a pumping engine," he said, "and I answered all 3 of them correctly and reasonably and in good time, and he drowned. Since then I have found that I am unable to be reasonable about a slow thing being done to somebody who cannot stop it. That is all. It is not a virtue, Miss Vale. It is a scar, and it aches, and doing this eases it." He paused. "You may take that as the whole account, and I will thank you not to ask again." Behind him the fire moved, and the letter rustled, and she did not ask again. But she did not go, either, for a long moment, and when at last she said, "Then I am glad of your scar," her voice was not level, and Ambrose stood at the window looking at the fell until he heard the door shut. Mr. Kestrel Dowd came to Dunmere Abbey on the last Tuesday in March, without an appointment, in a gig with yellow wheels. Ambrose received him in the great hall, standing, and did not offer him a chair, and this was not carelessness. There were 400 years of carrows under the chapel floor 40 feet away, and 11 stone coats of arms over Mr. Dowd's head, and a man of Ambrose's rank had at his disposal a whole grammar of small insults, which the law could not touch, and which the recipient could never afterward describe to anybody without sounding ridiculous. "Your Grace is very good," said Dowd. "I am not," said Ambrose. "Say what you have come to say." Kestrel Dowd was perhaps 45, narrow in the shoulder and thick in the middle, with a fine head of sandy hair he was proud of and small pale eyes that went round a room pricing it. He had a pleasant voice. That was the thing Ambrose noted and filed. The man's voice was genuinely pleasant, warm, apologetic, the voice of a fellow who hates to trouble you. "It is a delicate business," Dowd said, "and I would not for the world." "Miss Vale." "Your Grace has such directness." "Yes, Miss Vale." A sorrowful movement of the hands. "Your Grace will not know, how should you? The whole history of that unhappy young woman. Mrs. Vale is a lady of the tenderest heart. She has borne with a great deal. There were moneys missing from the household at Vale, going back 2 years. There was a brooch. There was an unfortunate attachment to a person in Kirkby Marl which the family were at some pains to—" "Name him," said Ambrose. Dowd blinked. "Your Grace." "The person in Kirkby Marl. You have made an accusation of an unfortunate attachment. Give me his name and his trade and his street, and I shall send a groom over this afternoon, and he will be back by 6, and we shall know." The pale eyes flickered. "I would not repeat a name in such a matter." "No," said Ambrose, "you would not go on." Dowd went on a little less smoothly, and the shape of it emerged, and it was a well-made thing of its kind. Mrs. Vale, out of pure delicacy, had not prosecuted the girl for the brooch. Mrs. Vale wished nothing but her stepdaughter's good. Mrs. Vale was distressed, deeply distressed, to hear from 3 separate quarters that Miss Vale was residing at Dunmere, and had charge of his Grace's ward, and went about the parish with medicines. Mr. Dowd himself was distressed. It was the kind of thing that got about. It was the kind of thing that a great family, with a young lady of 17 in it, and no lady at the head of the house, could not. "Mr. Dowd," Ambrose said, "you have twice used the word delicacy and once the word distressed, and you have not yet mentioned £2,300. Shall we save the morning?" The room went quiet. "I do not follow your Grace." 14th of March in the year before last. A mortgage of Sedgewater Home and the Fell Foot Limekilns, executed by Mrs. Sabra Vale under a power of attorney bearing her husband's mark, dated 3 weeks before his death and 3 months after his right hand ceased to be of any use to him, and witnessed by your clerk. Registered at Kirkby Marl, where this is the charming part. Mr. Dowd anybody at all may go, and read it for a shilling, including a girl with no money on a carrier's cart. He watched the man's face, and had the satisfaction, rare in his experience, of seeing a professional liar arrive somewhere he had not intended to be. "That is a private transaction," Dowd said, "and entirely regular, and I will not be catechized." "You will not be catechized by me," Ambrose agreed. "You will be catechized by Mr. Turnwell of York in writing at length, and then, I should think, by a master in chancery. In the meanwhile you will hear one thing from me, and then you will get into your gig." Miss Vale is employed in this house upon written articles dated and witnessed. She has her own key and her own door. She is under my protection, which is a phrase that has been much abused in this county, and which I use in its oldest sense, that any person who speaks against her character will find himself answering to me for it, and I have the leisure and the money to be extremely tiresome. Do you understand me? Your Grace has been imposed upon, said Dowd, and the pleasant voice had gone slightly thin. I say it as a friend to the family. That young woman has a way of being believed. Yes, said Ambrose. It is called telling the truth. It is very disarming. I have met it twice in my life. Good morning. He watched the yellow wheels go down the avenue, and stood a while longer at the door, and was not pleased with himself, because he had enjoyed it, and because a man who has enjoyed frightening an attorney has generally told that attorney more than he meant to. He had told Dowd that Chancery was coming. Dowd would now do two things. He would sell the mortgage on to somebody at arm's length, or he would make the girl's character so foul that no court would hear her. Ambrose went to find Halloway, and told him to have the Kirkby Marl registry watched. The county's answer came at the Haricot Assembly in the second week of April. He had not meant to go. He had not been to an assembly in 4 years, and Haricot's rooms were low-ceilinged and smelt of tallow, and the band could not keep together, and Sir Osric Pry was master of the ceremonies, and had been for 11 years, which told a person all they needed to know about Haricot. But Aurelia had turned 17 in January, and had never once danced in public, and had said nothing about it, and had spent 3 days pressing lavender into a shape that was clearly the beginning of a request she could not make. So on a Thursday in April Ambrose Carew put on a coat he loathed, and took his niece to the Haricot Assembly rooms, and took Miss Clemency Vale as well, in a grey silk gown that Aurelia had chosen and Halloway had paid for out of the household account under the heading of sundries, which was a lie the whole abbey had agreed to. He knew what he was doing. That was the thing he told himself in the carriage, watching the two of them opposite, Aurelia flushed and talking too fast, Clemency very quiet with her gloved hands folded, aware. He could see her being aware that she was being carried into a room full of people who had spent 6 weeks discussing her. Miss Vale. Your Grace. You will be cut tonight by Lady Pry, and probably by 2 of her daughters, and there will be a knot of women by the second window who will watch you and say things behind fans, and you will not be asked to dance by any man in the room who has a mother living. I had supposed as much. You will not be able to answer any of it, because the answer to a cut is silence, and the answer to a whisper is nothing at all. Your Grace, said Clemency, if you are going to be kind to me before I go in, I shall not be able to go in. Be disagreeable if you please. Ambrose considered her for a moment in the dark of the carriage. Your gown is 3 years out of the fashion, he said, and there is nothing whatever to be done about your hair. Thank you, said Clemency Vale, unsteadily, and Aurelia gave a shriek of laughter and they went in. It went exactly as he had said, and rather worse. Lady Pry, a large woman in puce, sister-in-law to Sabra Vale, and therefore the enemy's forward battery, received Ambrose with enormous warmth, received Aurelia with enormous warmth, and turned from Clemency Vale as though a chair had been moved into her path. It was beautifully done. There was no rudeness anywhere in it. Ambrose, watching, thought that if this woman had been given 11,000 acres to manage, she would have been a considerable figure in the world. The knot by the second window formed within 10 minutes. He heard a piece of it as he crossed the room, one of those pieces that a room lets a man hear on purpose, a fan lowered a fraction too late. And the arrangement is that she has charge of the niece, if you please, and her own door to her own room in the West Range, which I am told is quite apart from the—" Ambrose stopped. He did not turn his head. He simply stopped walking 6 feet away with his hands behind his back and stood there, and the silence spread out from him across that quarter of the room like frost across a puddle. He counted to 15. Then he walked on. Nobody by the second window said anything for a quarter of an hour, and the story went round Haricot within the week that the Duke of Dunmere had looked at Mrs. Caldy of thirst, and that Mrs. Caldy had been obliged to sit down. It was the most useful quarter of an hour's work he did that spring. But it did not touch the thing itself, and he knew it did not. You cannot stand in front of a whisper for the rest of a woman's life. At 10:30, he watched Sir Osric Pry lead Clemency out for a country dance. That was worse than the cut and cleverer. Pry was 50, florid, a magistrate, the master of the ceremonies, and a man who had never in his public life done a thing that could be complained of. And by leading out his sister's despised stepdaughter, he made himself, in one figure of 8, the most generous man in the room. Ambrose stood with his shoulder against a pillar and watched them down the set, and watched Pry talk, and watched Clemency Vale's face. She did not go pale. She kept her chin level and she answered, and once she smiled, and it was the smile of a woman being burned very slowly and determined to hold the candle steady. Whatever Pry was saying, he said it all the way down the dance and all the way up again. When it was over, Ambrose was there, before she left the floor. "Miss Vale, the next is a waltz and neither of us can waltz. Come and hold my glass." He got her into the passage by the card room, where there was a window open and nobody about but a boy with a tray, and she stood with her back to the wall and breathed carefully 3 times. "What did he say to you?" "It does not matter." "Miss Vale." "He said—" She stopped and looked at the window. "He said that he had a great respect for your family. He said that your ward was of an age to be brought out, and that a girl of 17 in a house with no lady at the head of it is a subject of general concern. He said that if a whisper were once got up about Miss Caro's situation, no settlement and no fortune would put it down, and that it would follow her to London and into whatever house she married into, and it would be my doing. He said he did not blame me. He said a young woman without a friend in the world will take what is offered and cannot be expected to weigh the cost to other people." Her voice was very level. "And then he said that a great man's kindness has a season, and that when the season is over the woman is still there, and that he had seen it 3 times in this county, and that he had sat on the bench when one of them came up for vagrancy at Michaelmas." Ambrose Caro stood in the passage of the Haricot Assembly Rooms and discovered that he wanted, with a real and physical hunger, to go back into that room and do something that would have finished him in the county for 20 years. "He is a liar," he said. "He is not," said Clemency. "That is the trouble with him. Everything he said is true, except the part he did not say, which is that he wants me frightened out of your house before Mr. Turnwell writes his next letter." She turned her head and looked up at him, and her eyes were dry. "It is a good scheme, your grace. It works upon me through the only 2 things I have got, your niece, and my own conscience. If I stay, I risk Orlia's name. If I go, I lose my case, my land, and £40 a year, and I am a companion in Leeds by June. Any woman in England would go." "You will not go." "I did not say I would go. I said any woman in England would." She put her hand flat on the windowsill. "But I want you to know, your grace, that from tonight I am costing you something. You have been generous to me on the footing that it cost you nothing but attorney's fees, and that footing is gone, and you should be at liberty to change your mind. People do. It is not a wickedness. I would rather you did it now in a passage than in 8 months in a letter." There was a good deal that Ambrose might have said. He had known for some weeks, since a wall at Sedge Head, since 8 seconds, precisely what he felt, and he had put it away in the place where he kept the things he had decided not to have, which was a crowded place. He had told himself that she was a woman under his protection with no money and no family, that a declaration from him was very nearly a command, and that a man who makes a command look like a proposal is a species of thief. So he did not say it, but he did say something, and he said it badly, which was so unlike him that he heard it happen. Miss Vale, when I was 24, I was married for 11 months to a woman I did not know, who did not want to be at Dunmere, and who died of a fever in a house she hated, and I did not grieve for her properly, because I had never troubled to learn who she was. When I was 32, my brother wrote to me 3 times about a pumping engine. I am telling you these things because I want you to understand that I am a man who has twice failed to see what was in front of him until it was under a slab, and that I am not, he stopped and began again, that I am not now failing to see it. Whatever the county says, whatever Price says, I know what is in my own house. You may cost me what you like. The band started up beyond the door, badly. Oh, said Clemency Vale, in a small, wrecked voice. That was not a declaration, said Ambrose. No, your grace. It could not be. You are in my employment, and you have £4 11 shillings, and there is a suit coming, and any word I said to you now would be a word said by a man with all the money and all the rank in the room. Do you follow me? Perfectly. Good, said Ambrose. Then we will go back in, and I will dance with my niece, who will tread on me, and you will drink lemonade and look bored, and on Monday you will show me the accounts of your penny bottles, because I mean to build you a room for it at Sedge Head. A room. A room with a fire and a floor of brick and a lock, and a woman to help you, and it will be called the Sedge Head Dispensary, and it will be paid for out of the quarry account as a charge upon the works, because that is what it is, and Mr. Dowd will find it very much harder to describe you as a kept woman when you are a salaried officer of an industrial concern with your own building. He offered his arm. Miss Vale, in 11 weeks you have taught my niece to laugh, and cut the fever mortality at Sedge Head by 2/3, and made yourself the most respected person in this parish, among the only 400 people whose respect is any use to me. Sir Osric Pry is master of the ceremonies at Haricot. Let us keep the 2 facts in proportion. She took his arm. Her hand was not quite steady on his sleeve, and he was aware of it for the whole length of the passage, and for some hours afterward. They went in. He danced with Aurelia, who trod on him twice and glowed. Clemency Vale drank lemonade by the second window and looked bored, and did it so well that Mrs. Caldy of thirst was reduced to discussing the band. And at midnight, as the carriages were being called, Ambrose came out under the lamp of the Haricot portico, and found a small old woman in a black bonnet standing at the bottom of the steps in the way of everybody, being told to move along by a footman. "Your Grace," she said, "Your Grace, it's Bessie Kell, Your Grace. I was nurse to Miss Anne Sedgewater, and I dressed her for her wedding, and I laid her out when she died, and I nursed the child after her. 31 years at the home and Vale between them." "Let her come up," said Ambrose. The footman let her come up. "I've walked from thirst," said Bessie Kell, "on account of I heard tonight she was here, and I've not been let see her since her father died. They turned me off at 6 weeks' notice and no character, and I want to know if it's true what they say, that Miss Clemmies took a place." "It is true," said Ambrose. "She keeps my still room and physics my tenants, and she is well and she is safe. Mrs. Kell, how old are you?" 73, Your Grace, come Whitsun." "And your memory?" "Better than my knees." Ambrose Carew looked down at her for a long moment while the carriages ground on the gravel behind him, and the assembly emptied out around them, and he thought about a mark on a power of attorney, and about a man whose right hand had died at Martinmas, and about who is in a house at Martinmas, and who empties the basin, and who sits up. "Mrs. Kell," he said, "were you at Vale House in the January before Mr. Vale died?" "I was at Vale House," said Bessie Kell, "the whole of that winter, and I sat up with him 5 nights out of 7, and I know what I know." "Then get into my carriage," said the Duke of Dunmere, "and let us go home and have a very long conversation about the 2nd of January. Bessie Kell sat in the muniment room at 1 in the morning with a cup of hot milk and brandy that she did not touch, and told them about the 2nd of January. And Ambrose wrote it down himself, page after page, because he did not want a clerk in the room. "He'd had his seizure at Martinmas," she said. "The right side went. He could walk after a fashion with the stick in his left, and he could talk, only slow, and he knew everybody to the last day, and he could not so much as hold a spoon in that right hand, let alone a pen. I fed him. I fed him 5 nights out of 7 from Martinmas to the 20th of January, when they turned me out of the sick room and put Fenna in." "Was there a day," Ambrose said, "in the first week of January when there was business done in that house? Strangers, papers." Bessie Kell's old face folded up with the effort. "There was a day," she said. "There was a day the master was carried down. That I do remember, because I said it was madness, and I said so out loud, and Mrs. Vale told me my place. They had him down to the small parlor in a chair, 2 footmen and me, and there was a fire lit in there that had not been lit since Christmas, and Mr. Dowd was there, and Mr. Dowd's young man with the ink, and Sir Osric, and they were an hour. And when I went in after to take the master up, he was grey as ash, and there was ink on his hand." "Which hand?" The room went very quiet. Ambrose heard Clemency stop breathing. "The left," said Bessie Kell. "On the side of the little finger, the way you get it when a person takes your hand and pushes it. I washed it off with the flannel, and he was crying, Your Grace, and he'd not cried since Miss Anne died, and I asked him what they'd had him at, and he said," she stopped, and her chin worked. "He said, Bessie, they've had my mark, and I don't know what for." Ambrose set the pen down. "Mrs. Kell," he said, "on the day you were dismissed, what reason were you given?" "That I was old," she said, "and that I'd been overheard talking of family matters in the kitchen, which was a lie, and there was 6 weeks' wages and no character, after 31 years, and Miss Clemmy was away at her aunt's at Thirst that fortnight, and never knew till I was gone." "Where have you lived since?" "With my sister's boy at Thirst. He has the smithy, I do for him." "You will live at Dunmere from tomorrow," said Ambrose, "in the room over the kitchen passage, with a fire and £18 a year and nothing whatever to do. And you will not go beyond the park without Halloway, and you will not tell any living soul in this county what you have told me tonight, until a gentleman from York asks you for it upon oath." Bessie Kell looked at him with her mouth open. "I've not to do anything." "You are a witness, Mrs. Kell," said the Duke of Dunmere. "You are at present the most valuable object in this house, and I include the plate." When she had been taken away to bed, protesting all the way down the passage about the state of a house, where nobody would let her carry her own bundle, Clemency Vale stood in the middle of the muniment room, with her hands pressed against her mouth, and did not cry, and was very close to it. "Sit down," said Ambrose. "No, Miss Vale. If I sit down, I shall be no use for an hour." She took her hands away. "Your Grace, he knew. He knew they had done something to him, and he could not tell anybody, and he died in February, and all that time I was in the next room being no use at all. You were 19 years old and away at thirst. I was 23, said Clemency, and I have been over it, and there was nothing I could have seen, and I have told myself so 1100 times, and it does not answer. There is no arithmetic for it, as I said to you about my father, and I was very clever when I said it, and I am not clever now. Ambrose came round the table. He stopped 2 feet away, which was as near as he permitted himself, and he did not touch her, and it cost him more than anything he had done that year. Look at me, he said. There is no arithmetic for it. There is, however, a court of chancery, which is slow and vile and expensive and works, occasionally, in the end. We have a mark made with a dead hand, an attorney's clerk who witnessed it, a magistrate who was in the room, a woman of 73 who washed the ink off, and a mortgage of £2,300 which has bought a carriage and 9 weeks at Harrogate. That is not a grievance, Miss Vale. That is a case. They will say she is old and confused, and a discharged servant with a spite. They will say all of that, Ambrose agreed, and we shall have the answer ready, and the answer will be the household books at Vale House and the Kirkby Marlbank, which Mr. Turnwell will get by subpoena, and which will show, I am prepared to wager the quarry on it, that Mr. Dowd's £2,300 never left Mr. Dowd. He paused. Go to bed. You have a woman at Fell Foot expecting on Thursday, and you are no use to her in this state. She went as far as the door and turned. Your Grace, Miss Vale, when you said in the passage at Harricot that you were not now failing to see what was in front of you. Her voice was quite steady, which he came in later years to understand, was the way she managed the things that frightened her most. I have not asked you to explain it, and I shall not, and I have not built anything on it because I have nothing to build with. But I should like to say once, and then never again until it is proper, that I heard it. Miss Vale, said Ambrose after a moment, go to bed. Yes, your Grace, said Clemency Vale, and went. And he sat down at the table where his grandfather had sat and looked at 9 pages of an old nurse's evidence in his own handwriting, until the candle went blue. April went into May, and Ambrose Carew discovered that he had become busy in a way he had not been since the year he took the title, and that he was happier than he had been in 11 years, and that this was an extremely dangerous condition for a man in his position. The dispensary at Sedgehead went up in 5 weeks. A stone room built onto the end of the counting-house, brick floor, 2 windows, a range, a press, a lock, a bench for waiting under the eaves, and over the door a slate with Sedgehead dispensary cut into it by the quarry's own letter-cutter, who did it in his own time and would not be paid. It opened on the 14th of May, and 41 people came, and Ambrose stood at the back with his hat in his hand for 2 hours. Halloway, who had been steward at Dunmere for 19 years, and had never once volunteered an opinion on anything not connected with drains, said on the way home, Your Grace, the works have lost 410 days to sickness since Christmas. Last year at this date it was 960. Yes, at 2 and 4pence a day, your Grace, that is. I can do the sum, Halloway. Yes, your Grace. A pause, the horse's hooves, the beck. It is an odd thing to say of a dispensary, but I believe it is the best investment the estate has made since the pumping engine. Ambrose said nothing at all for a mile, and Halloway, who had been in the flooded shaft with him in 1811, said nothing either, which was one of the reasons Ambrose had kept him. Orla Carew, meanwhile, grew 4 inches in the estimation of her own household and acquired a suitor. The suitor was young Mr. Nathaniel Pry, Sir Osric's second son, 22, pink, perfectly harmless, in love with his own horse, and he began to be seen upon the Dunmere road with a great deal of regularity in the last week of April. Ambrose watched this development with the cold interest of a man watching a stoat come out of a wall. "He is a fool," he said to Clemency, "but he is not a knave, which is more than can be said for his family. And he is being sent." "You are certain?" "I am certain that his father is master of the ceremonies at Haricot, and that Nathaniel Pry has never in his life had an idea of his own about anything but hunting. If Orlia is engaged to Pry by August, then the mortgage at Sedgewater becomes a family matter, and Pry stands up in the county as the man who mended a quarrel, and I am tied hand and foot, because I cannot ruin my niece's father-in-law." He turned a page. "It is quite a good scheme. It is a better scheme than the last one. I begin to have a grudging respect for the man." "What will you do?" "Nothing," said Ambrose. Clemency put down the pestle. "Nothing. If I forbid it, she will be in love with him by Thursday, because she is 17 and I am a tyrant. If I say nothing whatever, she will spend a summer with a young man who cannot talk about anything but a horse, and she will find out for herself, and she will have had a summer which she is owed." He looked up. "Unless you think me wrong." "I think," said Clemency slowly, "that you are the first man I have known who can wait." "I am the worst waiter in England," said Ambrose. "I merely know what it costs to be quick." She was right about him in one particular and wrong in another, and it took the summer to prove both. The blow, when it came from the direction he had not watched. On the 2nd of June, Mr. Turnwell wrote from York that the mortgage of Sedgewater Home had been assigned. Kestrel Dowd had sold his interest on the 29th of May for £2,400 to a Mr. Amos Grigg, wool stapler of Leeds, a stranger to the county, a man of business with no part in any of it, and therefore, in the eye of the law, a purchaser without notice. Ambrose read it standing up. "Explain it to me," said Clemency, when he had given her the letter and she had read it twice. "Plainly. I can bear the plain thing." "It is the neatest move in the game," said Ambrose. "Dowd has stepped out from under the fraud. If we prove tomorrow that your stepmother had no power to mortgage your land, we prove it against Grigg, who paid his money in good faith and knew nothing. And a court of equity is very tender toward a man who paid his money in good faith. Grigg will say, 'I bought a registered mortgage from an attorney of 18 years standing. Am I to be ruined for another man's forgery?' And he will have a point, and the answer to it will take 3 years and cost £800, and at the end of it the most likely result is that Grigg is paid off out of the estate itself. The land is sold to satisfy him. You get whatever is left, which upon 412 acres and 2 lime kilns after 3 years of chancery is, in my experience, a hat." Clemency sat down on the stillroom stool. "And Mr. Dowd has £2,400. And Mr. Dowd has £2,400 and a clean pair of hands, and is at this moment, I should think, ordering a new gig." Ambrose put his palms on the bench. "So we go at it from the other end. We do not fight Grigg, we fight for the money." "I do not follow." "If no money ever passed from Dowd to your stepmother in the first place, if the £2,300 was a fiction, and the whole instrument a device to convey your inheritance into his hands under color of a loan, then the fraud is Dowd's from the beginning, and he is liable for every farthing of it personally, and his gown goes with it. We do not need to unwind the mortgage. We need to make Kestrel Dowd pay Amos Grigg out of his own pocket, and that means we must prove what became of the money, and that means the household books at Vale House, and the Kirkby Marlbank and Mrs. Vale's Harrogate lodgings, and every tradesman's bill in that house for 2 years. He straightened. "It is dull work. It is 9 months of dull work. Miss Vale, can you read a farm account?" "I have kept my father's since I was 15. "Then Turnwell will send the abstracts here and you will read them. And I shall write to a man in Leeds and find out who Amos Grigg is, and whether he is honest, because if he is honest, he is our best witness and does not know it. They began on the 10th of June, in the muniment room, on a great table, 4 evenings a week. It was in those evenings, and Ambrose was aware of it at the time, which is unusual, that the thing between them stopped being a rescue and became something else. There is no romance in an abstract of accounts. There was a candle between them and a jug of small beer, and Bessie Kell asleep in a chair in the corner with her mouth open, put there by clemency in a fit of propriety so transparent that neither of them ever mentioned it. There were columns. There was Mrs. Vale's mantua-maker at Harrogate, 9 guineas. There was a hunter bought at Ripon for 80. There was wine, £91 in a single year, delivered to Vale House and paid for. This was the piece Clemency found, at 11:30 on a Thursday, and she said his name. Dunmere. He looked up. She had never called him anything but Your Grace. Look, she said, the wine, it is paid by Dowd. It is not paid out of the estate at all. Look at the tally. The vintner's account is settled quarterly by K. Dowd, attorney, and entered in her book as received of Mr. Dowd on account. And here, the carriage, the Harrogate lodgings. He has not lent her £2,300, Dunmere. He has been keeping her, in instalments, out of the rents of my mother's land, and putting it down as advances on the mortgage, and I will wager the whole of it does not come to £1,100. Ambrose came round the table and stood over the page with his hand flat on the wood beside hers, and read it, and read it again. That is it, he said quietly. That is the whole of it. He never advanced the money because he never had to. He gave her the rents of her own stepdaughter's land, £100 at a time, called it a loan, and sold the security to a stranger for £2,400 in cash. He looked at her. Miss Vale, you have just done in 1 evening what 4 attorneys did not do in 3 months. They did not know what a wine bill at Vale House ought to be. No, said Ambrose. They did not know anything about it at all. That is what money buys, and it is why money is not enough. Her hand was 4 inches from his on the table. Neither of them moved for a moment that went on slightly too long, and Bessie Kell snored, and the candle guttered, and Ambrose Carew thought with perfect clarity, I shall ask her when this is finished, and not 1 hour before it, and if she says no, I shall build her a house. He said, there is elderflower in the hedge at Fell Foot going over. You said you wanted it. Tomorrow, said Clemency, not moving her hand. Tomorrow, said Ambrose. 3 days later the warrant came. He was in the yard at 7 in the morning with a hoof in his hand, when Halloway came at a run, which Halloway did not do, and behind Halloway came a constable from Kirkby Marle and a man in a brown coat, and the constable was so frightened at finding himself in the Duke of Dunmere's stable yard that he took his hat off and would not put it back on. Your Grace, I've a warrant, Your Grace, and I'd not have come, only it's sworn and there's no help for it. Give it to me. It was a warrant to apprehend Clemency Ann Vale, spinster, of this parish, upon the information and oath of Sabra Vale, widow, charging her with the larceny of a brooch of gold and garnets of the value of £6, the property of the said Sabra Vale, on or about the 9th of February, and it was signed at the foot by 2 magistrates, and the second name was Osric Pry, Bart. Ambrose read it twice in the cold morning air, with the horse breathing on his shoulder, and understood 4 things in the space of 8 seconds. They had waited until June, when the case was moving, and not February, when the brooch was taken. They had made it larceny above the value of £5, which was not a matter for a fine. They had sworn it before 2 magistrates, one of them so that no single justice could be blamed and no single justice could withdraw it. And they had done it now, in this week, because a woman in jail awaiting the quarter sessions is not a witness, and is not a claimant, and is not a person whose word about a dead man's ink-stained hand any court in England will ever again weigh against an attorney's. "Halloway," said Ambrose Carew, and his voice was so quiet that the constable took a step back. "My horse and the chaise, and send a boy on the fast mare to York with a letter I shall write in 4 minutes. And find Miss Vale and bring her to me, and do not let one servant in this house say one word to her before I do." She came into the muniment room with her apron still on, and her hands wet. "There is a constable in the yard," said Clemency Vale. "Mrs. Pardew is having hysterics on the back stairs, which she has wanted to do since February, and I cannot grudge it her. Is it the brooch?" "It is the brooch." "Larceny." "Above £5, said Ambrose. "Sworn before 2 justices, one of them on the 9th of June, for a thing said to have been done on the 9th of February. They mean you in Kirkby Marl jail until the quarter sessions in October." She stood very still in the middle of the room with her wet hands held a little away from her skirts, and he watched the color go out of her face and stay out. "Then I had better change my gown," she said. "Miss Vale, they will look at what I am wearing. If I go in an apron, they will write it down as a servant taken up for theft. And if I go in the gray silk, they will write it down as a young woman who has been given silk. And there is a brown poplin which will do, and Bessie will pin my hair, and I shall want the memorandum book out of the second drawer. Because if I am to sit in a jail until October, I would rather sit with the accounts than without them." Her voice cracked exactly once on the word jail, and she went straight on over it as if it were a stone in a road. "And you must not come with me, your grace. I am asking you. If you stand in that room, they will have the whole county saying by Sunday that the Duke of Dunmere is in a passion for a thief." "You have finished," said Ambrose. "I have finished." "Then attend to me, because we have perhaps an hour." He turned the paper on the desk toward her. He had written it while Halloway fetched her, and the ink was still shining. "A charge of larceny is not tried by Sir Osric Pry. It is heard before justices in petty session, at Kirkby Marl, on Friday, and they must either dismiss it, or commit you for trial at the quarter sessions, and in the meantime bail may be taken. Bail in larceny is at the discretion of the justices, and Pry will oppose it, and it will be granted notwithstanding, because I have sent to York for Mr. Bray, who will be here tomorrow night, and because the sureties will be myself in £500 and Mr. Alsop, quarry captain of Sedge Head, in 50, which he offered before I asked him, in the yard, 10 minutes ago, in front of the constable." Clemency's hand went to her mouth. "Alsop offered £50, which I should think is every penny he has in the world, and he was extremely insistent, and I have accepted, because I want the bench at Kirkby Marl to look at that recognizance and see a working man's name upon it beside mine. Now sit down. There is worse and better." She sat. "The worse," said Ambrose. "Between now and Friday you must not be alone in a room with any servant, any tenant, or any person from Vale House, and you must not go beyond the park, and you must not physic anybody, not one soul, because if there is a death in this parish this week they will lay it at your door. If Bessie Kell is asked a question by a stranger, she is to say she is deaf. You will be watched. Somebody in this house is being paid. I do not yet know who, and it is very probably a scullery maid with a mother to keep, and I do not much blame her. And everything you say until Friday will be repeated with the tenses changed." "And the better?" "The better," said Ambrose Carew, is that they have made a mistake, and it is a large one. Miss Vale described the brooch to me, not what it looks like, where it came from." She looked at him for a moment, and then something went through her face like light going along a wall. "It was made for my mother," she said, "by Mr. Ephraim Sowerby of Kirkby Marl, in the year she was married, out of her own grandmother's garnets and her father's gold ring, and it has her initials cut on the plate at the back, A.S. to C.V., because she had it recut for me on my 10th birthday, when she was already ill, and Mr. Sowerby did the cutting himself and charged 4 shillings, and my father entered it in the household book." "Is Sowerby alive?" "He must be near 80. "Is he alive?" "His grandson has the shop," said Clemency. "The old man sits in the back. I saw him at Christmas 2 years ago. He knew my mother's name." Ambrose stood up and went to the door and opened it. Holloway, Kirkby Marl now in the chaise. The jeweller Sowerby, the grandson and the grandfather both, and the day books for the years, Miss Vale. 92 for the making, 1802 for the cutting. Both years and all the years between, and if he will not lend them, buy them, and if he will not sell them, sit in his shop until Friday. And on your way call at Vale House and leave my card upon Mrs. Vale with nothing written on it whatever, because I wish her to spend 2 days wondering." He turned back. Clemency Vale was on her feet. "Your Grace, you cannot possibly—" "Miss Vale," said Ambrose, "I have been a duke for 6 years, and it has been of very little use to anybody. Permit me 1 week of enjoying it." The constable took her at 11, and Ambrose, who had promised nothing about the yard, stood at the foot of the steps while it was done. He had thought a good deal in the 2 hours about how to stand there. In the end he stood bareheaded, with his hands behind his back, and he did not speak to the constable and did not speak to her. And when she came down the steps in the brown poplin with her memorandum book under her arm and Bessie Kell howling openly at the top of the stair, he inclined his head to Clemency Vale exactly as he would have done to the Countess of Anywhere, and held it a full second, and every servant in the house saw him do it from the windows, and it was in the village by 2 o'clock and in Haricot by dark, and it was worth more to her than £500 of bail. She was in Kirkby Marl 3 nights. Bray came down from York on the Wednesday, and had her out of the common room and into the keeper's parlour within an hour of arriving, at a cost of 2 guineas, which Ambrose paid without comment. Holloway sat in Sowerby's shop for 2 days, and came back on the Thursday night with the grandson, the day books for 11 years, and a written statement, and old Ephraim Sowerby himself in a hired chaise with a foot warmer and a rug, and a good deal of pleasure in the whole business. The petty session at Kirkby Marl on Friday the 15th of June was held in the long room of the Fleece, and it was full at 9 in the morning, and packed at 10, and there were men standing in the yard under the windows. Ambrose came in at 20 minutes past 9 and took a seat at the side, and did not sit at the bench, though the chairman half rose to offer it, and this refusal was noted too. Sir Osric Pry was on the bench. So were 2 others, Mr. Framley of Thirst, elderly and asleep, and Dr. Crake, the vicar of Haricot, who was neither elderly nor asleep, and who owed his living to nobody in that room, a thing Ambrose had ascertained on the Tuesday. Sabra Vale gave her evidence in a bonnet with black feathers, and did it well. She had a fine deep voice, and she used the words unhappy girl 4 times. The brooch, she said, had come to her from her late husband as part of the plate and jewels of the house. She had missed it at Christmas. She had found it in her stepdaughter's workbox on the 9th of February, and had, in her weakness, contented herself with turning the girl out of doors rather than expose her. And it was only the representations of friends, and her duty to the county, and the discovery that the young woman had got into a great family, where there was a young lady of 17 that had at last compelled her, most reluctantly, to swear the information. "And where is the brooch now, madam?" said Mr. Bray, rising. "In my keeping." "Have you it here?" "I have." "Be so good as to hand it to the bench." It went along the bench, garnets in a gold surround, old-fashioned, not fine. Pry turned it over with his thumb and said, "A trumpery thing to be so much trouble," and there was a laugh, and Ambrose let it go by because Bray had wanted the laugh. "Sir Osric," said Bray, "would you have the great kindness to read to the court what is cut upon the plate at the back?" The room went quiet. Pry held it up to the window. His florid face did not change at all, which Ambrose thought was rather fine of him. "There are letters," he said, "A.S. to C.V." "Thank you, Mrs. Vale. What is your name?" "You know my name, sir." "For the note, madam." "Sabra Vale." "S.V.," said Bray. "And the young woman at the bar is Clemency Vale, C.V., and the letters A.S. are, I apprehend, Anne Sedgewater, afterward Anne Vale, this young woman's mother, deceased. Mrs. Vale, at the date of your marriage to the late Mr. Vale, had Anne Vale been dead 16 years, or had she not?" Sabra Vale said that she was not a lawyer, and that jewels were often recut. "They are," Bray agreed pleasantly. "Call Ephraim Sowerby." Ambrose watched the room while the old jeweler was helped up the 2 steps with his day-books on a cushion, and he had the pleasure, a cold and complete pleasure, and one of the few of his life that he never afterward regretted, of seeing Kestrel Dowd, at the back of the room in a good coat, work out what was going to happen about 4 seconds before it did. Old Sowerby was 81 and deaf on one side, and had made the brooch with his own hands in 1792 out of Miss Anne Sedgewater's grandmother's garnets. He had the entry in a copperplate hand, "Miss A. Sedgewater, brooch, garnets set in gold of client's ring, 2 GNS. He had the second entry 10 years later, "Mrs. Vale of Vale House, recutting plate of garnet brooch, initials A.S. to C.V., 4s, delivered by hand to Miss Clemency on her birthday, the child being 10 years of age and the mother very ill." He said the last part without being asked twice, and looked around the room, and nobody stopped him. He also said, when Bray put the brooch into his hands, that he knew his own work, and that this was his work, and that he had known the young lady's mother from a girl, and that if there was any person in Kirkby Marl who said Miss Anne's brooch belonged to somebody else, he should like to look at them. There was a considerable noise in the room. Mr. Framley woke up. Dr. Craik, the vicar of Haricot, leaned forward and asked, in the mild voice of a man who has been waiting an hour and a half to do it, whether the informant had been aware, when she swore that the brooch came to her with the plate of the house, that it was engraved to the defendant by name. Sabra Vale said she had never troubled to examine the back of it. "You missed it at Christmas," said Dr. Craik. "You searched for it in February, you have kept it in your own hand for 4 months, and you have never troubled to look at the back of it." "I am not a jeweler, sir." "No," said Dr. Craik, "you are a witness upon oath." And he sat back and looked along the bench at Sir Osric Pry for rather a long time. They were out 11 minutes. The charge was dismissed. Dr. Craik, delivering it, observed that the bench had heard evidence that the article in question had been the property of the defendant since her 10th year, that the information ought never to have been sworn, and that the bench trusted no similar instrument would be laid before it in the future. And he said the last part looking at nobody in particular, in the way that a clergyman can, and it was the most brutal thing Ambrose heard said in a court of law in his life. And then Kirkby Marl went out into the yard of the Fleece and cheered. He had not expected it. It was the one thing that whole spring that he had not calculated, and it took him unprepared, standing in the doorway with his hat in his hand. 200 people in an inn yard, quarrymen from Sedge Head who had walked 8 miles and lost a day's pay to stand in a yard, and the cooper's wife from the second row whose husband had lived, and Mary Alsop with a bundle in a shawl, and a great roar going up when Clemency Vale came out of the door. She stopped on the step. He was close enough to see her hands. "Miss Vale," Ambrose said under the noise, "they are cheering you. It is customary to acknowledge it." "I do not know how." "Neither do I. It has never once happened to me." He put his hat on. "Bow your head to them. That is all it wants." She bowed her head to the Yard of the Fleece, and the Yard of the Fleece took its hats off to her. And Ambrose Carew, standing one step behind and to the left, thought that he had never in his life seen anything he wanted so much to look after. Then he looked past them all over the heads to the archway, where Kestrel Dowd was getting into his gig with his face perfectly composed, and Dowd looked back at him across 200 people, and the look was not the look of a beaten man. It was the look of a man closing a book at the end of a chapter. That night at Dunmere they had a supper in the Long Gallery, which had not happened since the 5th Duke's funeral. There was no company. There was Orlia, who cried twice and ate enormously, and Bessie Kell, who had been given a chair at the table by Clemency and would not sit in it and was finally installed by main force, and Halloway, in his good coat, at the foot, and Mrs. Pardew, who had spent the day telling everybody in the kitchen that she had never for one moment believed a word of it, and who came in with the syllabub herself and put it down in front of Clemency and said, gruffly, "There's a deal of cream in that," and went out very fast. Ambrose sat at the head of his own table and looked down it and understood, with the clarity that comes sometimes after a long strain, that he had a household. He had had 11,000 acres and 400 tenants, and a house with a chapel full of his family in it since 1811, and he had not had a household. And now, because of a woman standing in a gateway in the rain, he had one, and it was making an appalling noise about a syllabub. He went out afterward onto the terrace, because he did not trust his face. She came out after a while and stood at the other end of the balustrade, at a perfectly proper distance, and neither of them said anything for some minutes. Below them, the park went down to the beck, and the beck went off silver under the fell, and there was a smell of hawthorn going over. "Dowd was not troubled," said Clemency at last. "No. You saw it too." "I saw it," said Ambrose. "He has spent one weapon and he has others. Miss Vale, we won a brooch today. We did not win 400 acres and we did not touch him. The Chancery suit is set down for Michaelmas, and between now and Michaelmas he must destroy your credit as a witness or lose £2,400 and his profession. He will not sit still. Neither will Pry, who was made to look small in front of his own county today by a country vicar, and will never forgive any of us for it." "You are very cheerful for a man who has one." "I am extremely cheerful," said Ambrose Carew. "That is what alarms me." She laughed, a low sound, quite unguarded, the first he had heard from her, and after a moment she said, "It will be the hay before the next thing happens. Nothing wicked ever happens in haytime. Everybody is too tired." He remembered that later. He remembered it in particular on the night of the 7th of August, when the sky over the fell turned the color of a bruise at 4 in the afternoon, and the beck at Sedge came up 11 feet in 5 hours, and Mary Alsop's sister at Fell Foot went into a long, bad labor on the wrong side of the water. Ambrose was at Sedge Head when the storm broke, standing in the counting-house with Alsop and a map of the upper workings, and the rain came onto the slate roof, with a sound like shingle being tipped out of a cart. By 6, the beck at the works was over its walls. By 7, the quarry road was a river, and they had the horses up into the top yard. At 8, in a lull, he rode home the long way round by the ridge because the low road was gone, and came into the stable-yard at Dunmere at 9 to find Bessie Kell in the archway in the rain without a shawl, and knew before she opened her mouth. "She's away to Fell Foot," said Bessie Kell. "The lass came for her at 5, Alsop's wife's sister, her that's expecting, and it's 24 hours she's been at it, and the woman at Fell Foot has give over and sent for Miss Clemmy. And she took the basket, and she took Peg from the kitchen with a lantern, and she went at 5:10, your Grace. And Peg's come back an hour since crying. She says they got over the Packhorse Bridge, and Miss Clemmy sent her home out of it before the water rose, and said she'd bide the night." "Halloway," said Ambrose. "Your Grace." "The bridge at Fell Foot, when was it repaired?" Halloway's face was gray. "It was not, your Grace. It was surveyed in the spring. It is in the list. The middle pier is scoured, and I marked it for the autumn because the mason was at the dispensary." There was one moment, perhaps a second and a half, in which the Duke of Dunmere stood in his own stable-yard in the pouring rain, and understood that he was going to hear this sentence again for the rest of his life if he did not move in the next 4 seconds. Fresh horse, not the mare, the black, rope, the long coil from the quarry cart, 40 feet in the short, 2 lanterns and the tinderbox in oilcloth. Alsop is at the works, send a boy up the ridge for him and for 4 men and the hurdle cart. Bessie, go in. Aurelia is not to be told anything except that I have gone to Fell Foot on estate business. Your Grace, the lass is on the far side. I know which side she is on, said Ambrose. He was in the saddle in 6 minutes with 40 feet of rope across his shoulder, and he went up the ridge in the dark, with the rain coming sideways and the black horse fighting him at every gate. And afterward, he could remember almost nothing of that ride except the noise. The whole moor was making a noise. Every gill and syke and ditch off the fell had turned into a white thing shouting downhill. And under it all, as he came down the last field, was the low grinding sound of the beck at Fell Foot, moving stones the size of a chest of drawers. He came out on the lane above the ford at 10:30. There was no ford. There was a brown flood 80 feet wide where a stream had been, going by at the speed of a trotting horse and carrying whole hawthorns with their roots in the air. And the Packhorse Bridge stood in the middle of it, with the water breaking white halfway up its parapet. And on the far bank there was a lantern. Ambrose got down and looped the rope round the trunk of the ash at the lane end, because a man who does not think for 11 seconds in that situation drowns. The lantern on the far side came down the bank, and he heard her voice across the water, thin and cut into pieces by the noise, but her voice. "Do not come over, Dunmere. The middle pier is gone." "Is she delivered?" "What?" "The woman, is she delivered?" "An hour ago," the lantern shouted. "Both living. Dunmere, go back, the bank here is falling, I am going up to the barn." And then the bank did fall. He saw it. That was the thing that stayed with him. He saw the whole of it, and it took a very long time. The lantern moved perhaps 3 feet to the left, and the field edge she was standing on 8 feet of turf and root over scoured clay, undercut for 4 hours by a flood that had been eating it like a tongue leaned outward, and folded, and went into the water with a sound he could hear over everything else, and the lantern went out. Ambrose Carew ran 40 yards downstream along the lane in the dark, with the rope in his hands. He knew that water. He had fished it as a boy, had waded it in August with his brother when it was 10 inches deep over gravel, and he knew, because he had known it since he was 9 years old, that 150 yards below the ford, the beck went hard against the rock under Fellfoot Barn and turned, and that on the inside of that turn there was a shingle bar and a stand of alder, and that everything the beck carried came round that bend on the outside and got flung across it. He was in the alders in half a minute, up to his thighs, with the rope round his chest and hitched under his arms and the free end round the biggest of the trees, and he stood in the flood in the dark and shouted her name. Nothing, then something pale, 20 feet out, going by fast, and it was a sheep. He shouted again, and out of the water, close, appallingly close, he heard a sound that was not the water, a cough, the ugly retching cough of somebody who has taken a river into the lungs, and there, in the black, he saw the shape of an arm come over the top of a wave of muddy water and go down again. He went out into it as far as the rope would let him, and then a foot further, which nearly killed him, and got a fistful of wool. It was her shawl, and the shawl came away. For perhaps 2 seconds, Ambrose held 8 ounces of wet wool in the middle of a river, and knew, with a completeness he had known only once before in his life, standing in water to his thighs with a lantern over his brother's face, that he had come too late by a matter of feet. Then a hand closed on his wrist. Not on his coat. On his wrist, hard, the grip of a person who has been taught to hold a thrashing patient, and Ambrose closed his own hand round her forearm and put his other arm across her back, and let the flood swing them both round on the rope into the alders like a gate shutting. They came up on the shingle in 18 inches of water. He got her over the shingle and up the bank into the lee of the barn wall and put her down on her side, and she brought up half the beck onto the stones, and coughed, and breathed, and coughed, and swore one word, entirely audible, the only word of the kind he ever heard her use, and she never knew she had said it, and then she got hold of his coat with both hands. "The baby," she said. "Dunmere, the baby and Jane in the house, if the bank. The house is 30 feet above the water on rock. I have looked at it. They are safe." "Are you certain?" "I am certain." "Then," said Clemency Vale, "I am going to be sick again." And was, and he held her hair back out of the way, which no Duke of Dunmere had ever done for anybody, and it did not once occur to him that it was odd. Afterward there was a long time in the dark, against the barn wall. He got his coat off and round her, which was pointless, since it was as wet as she was, and did it anyway. She shook so hard that he could hear her teeth. He had one arm about her because there was nothing else to do with it, and her forehead was against his shoulder, and the rain fell on both of them and neither moved. "You should not have come," she said, into his coat. "Do not," said Ambrose. "The bridge was gone. If you had come across you would have." "Miss Vale, I am going to say something, and it is not the moment, and I am going to say it because the moment I have been waiting for is plainly a fiction, and I have nearly paid for it tonight with the only thing in this county I could not replace." He looked out at the water going by white in the dark. The middle pier of that bridge was surveyed in April and put on a list. "I have a list, Miss Vale. It is a very good list. My brother is under a slab in my chapel because of a list." She lifted her head. "That was not your—" "It was mine," said Ambrose. "It was reasonable, and it was mine, and I have been reasonable ever since, and it has cost me every warm thing I ever had. I am done with it. I am asking you tonight, in the wet, sitting on a stone, because I will not be a man who waits for a better hour. Marry me." The water went by. Somewhere up the hill a dog was barking itself hoarse. "You cannot," said Clemency Vale. "I can and I shall, and you may refuse me, but do not tell me what I can do." "Dunmere?" Her voice was wrecked from the beck and from something else. "Michaelmas, the suit. If we are engaged before Michaelmas, every word of my evidence is worthless. They will say I invented the whole of it to be a duchess. They will say Bessie Kell was bought. They will say the ink on my father's hand was my own tale, told to a rich man who—" "Yes," said Ambrose, "they will say all of it. Do you refuse me?" "You are not listening." "I am listening extremely closely. Do you refuse me?" There was a pause of a length he remembered for the rest of his life. "No," said Clemency, and began to cry, which she had not done in the road in February or in the jail at Kirkby Marl or in the yard of the Fleece, and did now, with her hands over her face, sitting on a stone in a flood in a borrowed coat. "No, I do not refuse you. I have not refused you since the 17th of June, and I have been keeping the accounts of a man I love in his own muniment room 4 nights a week with Bessie Kell snoring in the corner, and I have been very careful, and if you say one kind thing to me now, I shall be no use at all." "Your gown," said Ambrose Carew, "is beyond mending, and there is nothing whatever to be done about your hair." "Thank you," said Clemency Vale, and put her forehead back against his shoulder, and laughed, and cried, and shook. And he sat in the rain with his arm round her and his mouth against her wet hair, and did not kiss her, because there were 4 men and a hurdle cart coming down the lane with lanterns, and he had 200 years of Carew arrogance, and one absolutely unshakable intention concerning how this woman's name would stand in the county before he was done. Allsopp got them up to the barn. They were an hour drying by the fire in the kitchen at Fell Foot, and Ambrose stood over a mug of something dreadful and looked at Jane Frierson asleep in the box bed with her daughter's fist against her chin, and at Clemency Vale asleep sitting up in a wooden chair with a blanket round her and her hair down her back like a girl of 15, and the 4 quarrymen watching her the way men watch whether they respect. "Allsopp, your grace, when the water goes down, that bridge is to be rebuilt, and the pier put on rock, and it is to be done before the corn is in, and the cost is to be entered against the estate and not the works." "Aye, your grace." "And Allsopp," he set the mug down, "in September Miss Vale and I will be married. It will be said in this county that I have married my still-room woman. It will be said worse than that. I should like Sedge Head to hear it from me first in this kitchen tonight from my own mouth, and to hear also that she told me to wait until Michaelmas for the sake of a lawsuit, and that I refused." There was a silence in the kitchen at Fell Foot. One of the men took his cap off, which was absurd, since they were all in a farmhouse at 2 in the morning. "Your grace," said Allsopp, "I'll not say we're surprised." "You are not." "Beg pardon, your grace," said the youngest of the 4 from the corner, "but there's been money on it at the works since Whitsun." Ambrose Carew looked at the 4 of them. Then he laughed out loud in a farmhouse kitchen, for the first time in 11 years, so unexpectedly that Clemency woke up. They were married on the 11th of September in the chapel at Dunmere, by Dr. Craik, who came over from Haricot and asked nobody's leave to do it. It was not a great wedding and it was not a small one. It was a peculiar wedding, and Ambrose enjoyed every minute of it with a wolfish satisfaction he never troubled to conceal. There were 9 Carew cousins, 4 of whom came, 2 of whom wrote extremely long letters, and 3 of whom did neither. There were no prize. There was Bessie Kell in a new black silk in the 3rd pew with her chin up like a duchess. There was Halloway giving away the bride, having been asked by her in the muniment room, and having then gone out and stood in the yard for 10 minutes by himself. There was Mrs. Pardew in a bonnet with cherries on it. There was the entire population of Sedge Head standing in the churchyard, and along the avenue and up onto the wall, in their own clothes, in the rain, because it rained again, of course it rained, and old Sowerby of Kirkby Marl in a chaise with a foot warmer, who had made the ring out of Anne Sedgewater's wedding ring and his own gold, and would not take a penny for the work. And there was Aurelia Caro, 17, in white, who had made her uncle sit down 4 days before, and had said, with her hands twisted together, that she wished to say she had been ashamed of herself in February for repeating Mrs. Pardew's opinion, and would he please tell Miss Vale so, because she could not say it without crying, and who cried anyway, from the vestry door to the altar rail, and whose engagement to Mr. Nathaniel Pry had come quietly to nothing in July over the question of whether a woman may be interested in the drying of herbs. When it was done, Ambrose Caro walked out of his own chapel with his wife's hand on his arm into a churchyard full of quarrymen, and the bells went off over Dunmere for 11 minutes, and he thought, now let them come. They came on the 29th of September, which was Michaelmas, and they came very well prepared, and for the first time that year, the Duke of Dunmere had not the smallest idea what was in the letter that was handed to him. The letter was from Turnwell, and it was 11 pages, and the first line of it said that His Grace was requested to sit down before reading further, which in 20 years Turnwell had never written to anybody. Ambrose read it standing at the muniment-room window with the Michaelmas light coming in sideways, and when he had finished he read the 4th page again, and then he sat down after all. Dowd's answer to the Chancery bill had come in. It came in 3 parts, and the 3 parts were a machine. The first part was an affidavit by Sabra Vale, widow, deposing that her late husband, in the January before his death, had of his own free will, and in the presence of witnesses, executed a power of attorney, because he was resolved that his daughter, whose temper he had come to dread, should not have the disposal of the Sedgewater property, that the sums advanced by Mr. Dowd had been applied to the debts of the estate and the maintenance of the family, and that her stepdaughter had, from the age of 20, formed a settled design of getting the property into her own hands, had quarreled with her father, had taken jewels, and had at last got herself into the house of a nobleman of this county and married him. The second part was an affidavit by Kestrel Dowd, attorney, which was a model of its kind, sorrowful, precise, and full of dates. He deposed that he had advanced £2,300, that his books would show it, that he had assigned his interest to Mr. Grigg in the ordinary course of business, that he had never had any interest in the Sedgewater lands beyond his security, and that he had been for 18 months the object of a persecution begun by a young woman whose expectations he had innocently disappointed. And the third part was an exhibit. It was, the affidavit said, a paper found among Mr. Dowd's private letters upon a search made for the purposes of the suit, and it was set out in the answer, word for word, and Turnwell had copied it into his letter in his own tidy hand, and Ambrose Caro sat in his chair and read the words of it 4 times. Dear Mr. Dowd, I have thought over what you said to me on Thursday, and I am willing. You must be patient with me and not press me before the year is out for the sake of appearances, but I do promise faithfully that I will be your wife when the year is up and the property in your hands, for I see plainly that there is no other way for either of us. I have taken the £40 you left with Fenna, and I am much obliged for it. Burn this. C. Vale, Vale House, the 3rd of November. Well, said Ambrose, aloud to the empty room. He got up. He went round the table twice. He stood at the window for some time with his hands behind his back, looking at the beck, and he thought about the yard of the fleece and the 11 minutes of bells, and he was aware that his hands were shaking, and he made them stop. Then he sat down and began to write out, in a clean hand, everything he knew that was wrong with it, because that was what he was for, and because the alternative was to go out and find Kestrel Dowd. The 4th part of the machine was not in the answer at all. It arrived by a separate post an hour later, and it was a copy of a petition presented in the same court, in the matter of the infant Orlia and Caro, and it was signed on behalf of two of the Caro cousins who had written extremely long letters in September and had plainly been at work since. Orlia's fortune, £31,000, her father's provision, had been in chancery since 1811, and Ambrose was her guardian by the will and by the order of the court. The petition prayed that a new guardian be appointed, and the infant removed from Dunmere Abbey, upon the grounds, set out in 8 paragraphs, that His Grace the Duke of Dunmere had in February introduced into his household a young woman of no character, that the said young woman had in June been apprehended upon a charge of felony, that His Grace had entered into a recognizance for her, that His Grace had thereafter married her, and that the infant had thus for 7 months been in the daily society of a person, against whom a public accusation of theft, and of a design upon Mr. Dowd's affections had been made, to the manifest hazard of her reputation and settlement in life. At the foot, among the affidavits filed in support, was one from Sir Osric Pry, Bart, magistrate of this county, deposing to the facts of the information sworn in June, and to his own long acquaintance with the family. Ambrose read it through without moving. Then he folded it and put it in the breast of his coat, and went to find his wife, because there was not the slightest possibility of keeping it from her, and he would not have insulted her by trying. He found her in the still-room with her sleeves pinned back, and Orlia at the far bench pouring cordial through a funnel and singing something under her breath, and the window open on the first cold day of the autumn. "Orlia," he said, "go and sit with Bessie Kell for half an hour and take her the cordial, and do not come back until you are sent for." Orlia looked once at his face, and put the funnel down and went. "Well," said Clemency, "give it to me." He gave it to her, all of it, the affidavits and the petition and Turnwell's letter, and he stood by the window and watched her read, and it was the worst quarter of an hour of that year. She read the exhibit last. He knew the moment she reached it, because her whole body went still, not the composed stillness of the gateway, but the stillness of an animal that has heard a gun. "That is my hand," she said. "It is very like your hand." No, she held the page nearer the light. "Dunmere, you do not understand. That is not like my hand, that is my hand. The C and the way the L falls back into the E and the ampersand, nobody has ever written my ampersand. Somebody has had a paper of mine and copied it letter by letter." She looked up, and her face was white and appalled, and underneath, extremely angry. "I wrote 3 receipts for Mr. Dowd in the November before my father died, for tradesmen's bills he settled. I wrote them at his dictation, at the table in the small parlor, and he took them away, and I have not thought of it since. Then we are looking for a man who can copy a hand from a receipt." "His clerk," said Clemency. "Merritt. He engrosses 11 hours a day, and he can write 6 hands. He copied out my father's marriage settlement for me once for 2 shillings, and he made a joke of it. He said he could do it in the old scrivener's hand or the new, whichever pleased me." Ambrose Caro put that away in the front of his mind, where he kept the things he intended to use. "Say the rest of it," he said. "The rest of it. You have read the petition. You have read what they mean to do to Orlia. You have been standing there for 4 minutes with a great deal to say, and you have been choosing the least ruinous way of saying it, and I have watched you do that in this house since February, and I know the look of it. Say it." Clemency laid the papers down on the bench, very square, edge to edge. "They will win the petition," she said. "They will not." "Dunmere," she said his name gently, which was worse than shouting. You are the cleverest man in this county at everything except the one thing you cannot do, which is to see yourself from outside. Look at the 8 paragraphs. There is not a lie in them. Every one is true. I was engaged out of nowhere in February. I was taken up on a charge of felony in June. You went bail for me. You married me in September, 3 weeks before the suit. A master in Chancery in London who has never seen Sedge Head and never heard of Ephraim Sowerby will read those 8 paragraphs, and he will not think you wicked. He will think you infatuated, which for these purposes is the same thing, and rather more contemptible. And he will take Orlia away from you, and put her with your cousin Selina Caro at Thirst, who has never asked her one question about herself in 6 years. And she will be married by consent of the court at 19 to somebody's 3rd son. And she will cough all her life. And there will be nobody in the room who ever taught her to strain a syrup through flannel. Ambrose said nothing. And when they have done that, said Clemency, the same 8 paragraphs will be read against me in the Sedgewater suit, and every word Bessie Kell says on oath will be the evidence of a servant kept at the expense of the woman's husband, and every column I found in the accounts will be the work of the woman herself. And Amos Griggs' counsel will say, my lord, this whole case is the invention of a duchess who was a still-room maid in February, and the court will believe him, because it is exactly the sort of thing that is generally true. You have thought this out with great care. I have thought it out since the 11th of September, said Clemency Vale, in the night when you were asleep. And you have arrived at a proposal. I have arrived at the only one. She put her hands behind her back, which he had never seen her do. It was his own gesture, and it went through him like a splinter. I will go away. Not to Leeds, you would find me in a week, and I do not want to be found by force. To Sedgewater home, there is a roof on the west end of the old house, and Jane Frierson's mother is there and would have me. I shall live there quietly and physic the parish, and you will write to Turnwell and instruct him that her grace is not residing at Dunmere and takes no part in the suit, and you will answer the petition by saying that the person complained of has removed from the house, and Orlia will stay where she is. And in a year or 2 years, when the suit is done and the county has something else to talk of, we shall see. You are proposing, said Ambrose, to be my wife-in-law and not in fact in a farmhouse 4 miles off, in order to keep my niece's fortune and win a lawsuit. Yes. No, said Ambrose Caro. It is not your decision. It is very largely my decision. It is not, she said, and this is the only quarrel we shall ever have about it, so hear me out. If I stay, you lose Orlia, and you will bear it because you bear everything, and it will be the 3rd slab you carry, and I have watched what the other 2 have done to you. I will not be the 3rd. I would rather live at the home for 2 years with a roof at one end than be the reason you go into that chapel again. Her voice was perfectly level and her eyes were streaming, and she did not appear to have noticed. You said to me in the flood that you were done with being reasonable. Very well. I am not done with it. Somebody in this house has to be, and it had better be the one who has practice at doing without things. Ambrose crossed the still-room and took her face in both hands, which he had done perhaps a dozen times in 3 weeks, and never once with that expression. Listen to me, he said. 6 years ago I did the reasonable thing 3 times in writing, and my brother drowned. That is not a moral about lists. It is a moral about what happens when a man of my rank and my income arranges his affairs so as to give up the least possible amount and take the fewest possible risks, and calls it prudence. I have arranged my whole life so, since I was 24. I am done with it. I will not answer that petition by putting you in a farmhouse. I will answer it by breaking it, and dowd with it, and pry with it, in open court. And I will spend the quarry on it if the quarry is wanted. And if you lose, then I shall lose with my wife in my house, said Ambrose, which is the one arrangement I am not prepared to be reasonable about. Orlia is 17 and she loves you, and she would be sick at the notion of being bought at that price. Do you know what she said to me in April when I told her the county was talking? She said, "Then the county is stupid." She had never said a rude thing about anybody in her life. Clemency laughed terribly and put her forehead against his chest, and he held on. "There are 9 weeks to the hearing," he said into her hair. 9 weeks. Give me 9 weeks. 9 weeks, she said. She stayed 11 days. He knew afterward exactly when she decided. He could put his finger on the hour, though he had not seen it at the time. It was the 7th of October in the evening when Orlia had a bad night, the first of the winter, the cough tearing at her until 2 in the morning, and Clemency sat with her, and Ambrose stood in the doorway with a candle and heard his niece, between one fit and the next, say in a small hoarse voice, "They cannot really send me to Cousin Selina's. Uncle would not let them." Would he? And heard Clemency Vale say, "No, my dear, nobody is sending you anywhere." He should have known from the flatness of it. He had been listening to that voice for 8 months, and he knew every register of it, and he was tired, and he went to bed. On the 18th of October, he came in from Sedge Head at 4 in the afternoon, and Bessie Kell was standing in the great hall with her apron in both fists. There was a letter on the muniment-room table, and beside it on the bare oak, her wedding ring. He stood and looked at it for a long moment before he touched anything. He remembered noticing that she had put the ring down on the sealed side of the letter, so that it would not roll. The letter said, "My dearest, do not be angry for longer than a day, because I cannot spare you the day, but I can spare you nothing else. I have gone where you know, and there is a roof at that end, and Jane's mother has aired the room. I have taken nothing of yours but the gray silk and the memorandum book, which is mine. The ring I have left because a ring in a drawer at Sedgewater will be talked of by every soul who cleans that room, and there is nothing left to talk of if it is on your table at Dunmere. It is not given back. It is put down for a season. Tell Orlia the truth, all of it, because she is 17 and not a fool, and if you tell her a comfortable lie, she will find it out, and it will hurt her more than this will. Tell her I have not gone because of her. Tell her I have gone because of you, because I have seen your face in the chapel doorway, and I will not have it there again. Turnwell is to have my deposition. I shall swear it before whoever he sends, and I shall go to London and be examined if the court requires me, and I will not withdraw one word of the Sedgewater suit, and you may tell Mr. Dowd so with my compliments. But I will not be in your house while the Chancery reads those 8 paragraphs. 9 weeks, you said. I am giving you the 9 weeks. I am only spending them 4 miles off. Do not come for a fortnight. If you come tomorrow, I shall not be able to be sensible, and one of us must be. C. Ambrose Carew read it 3 times, standing up. Then he folded it and put it in his breast, and picked up the ring, and closed his fist round it so hard that the print of it was in his palm for an hour. "Your Grace," said Bessie Kell from the doorway, crying. "Your Grace, she went at 10 with the carrier, and she'd not let me come nor Peg neither." "Yes." "Your Grace, are you going after her?" The Duke of Dunmere stood in his muniment room and looked at the fell out of the window, and it was the 18th of October, and the leaves were off the ash, and the beck was low again, and running clear over the stones, as though it had never in its life picked up a bank and thrown it. "Not tomorrow," he said. "Send Halloway to me, and then bring me every candle in this house. Mrs. Kell, I am going to be in this room until the 4th of December, and when I come out of it, I shall either have Kestrel Dowd's profession in my hand, or I shall not have anything at all." The 9 weeks were the hardest work of Ambrose Carew's life, and he did most of it sitting down. He began with the paper. Turnwell had obtained, as of course, a sight of the original exhibit, and Turnwell, being a careful man of 61 who had been robbing the Carrows competently for 20 years, and had discovered in himself, late in life, an appetite for a fight, had done what nobody else in the case had thought to do, which was to hold the sheet up to a window. His letter of the 29th of October ran to 2 lines, and no compliments. Your Grace, the exhibit is written upon a half-sheet of laid paper, bearing in the watermark the maker's name ELLERBY and Son, and the figures 1818. The letter is dated the 3rd of November 1816. I have sent to Otley. Ambrose read it twice, and then got up, and then sat down again, and then went out of the muniment room and along the passage, and stood in the empty still-room for some minutes with his hand on the cold bench, and did not say anything at all, because there was nobody to say it to. Mr. Ellerby of Otley, papermaker, was 54 and a Wesleyan and a bore, and Ambrose gave him 3 hours of the 5th of November, and considered it the cheapest afternoon of the year. Every sheet of British paper, said Mr. Ellerby, had by the act borne the maker's name and the year of manufacture in the mold since '94. The mold was made up fresh each year, and the old wires cut out, and the new soldered. His own molds for 1818 had been made up at Christmas in 1817, and no sheet from them had gone out of his mill before the February following. His daybooks showed the customers. The Kirkby Marl stationer, Mr. Bowes, was one. And Mr. Ellerby would say all of that in any court in the kingdom, and would bring the molds if they wished it, and would be obliged if his Grace would take a tract. Ambrose took the tract. He kept it, in fact, for the rest of his life, in the drawer with the ring print and the letter. Then he went at the clerk. Merritt was 38, unmarried, and kept a sister at Ripon who was not right in her mind, and he engrossed 11 hours a day in a back room in Haricot for £80 a year, and could write 6 hands. Ambrose did not go near him. He sent Turnwell, in a hired chaise, with no money whatever, and one piece of information, that a paper laid before a court of equity had been proved to be written upon a sheet manufactured 2 years after its date, that the paper was in a clerk's hand, that forgery was a capital felony, and that when the thing came out, as it had now, beyond any remedy, come out, the attorney whose exhibit it was would have one course only, which was to swear he had received the letter innocently from a young woman and knew nothing of its making, and to leave the man who had made it standing in the dock alone. Turnwell put that to Merritt at 10 in the morning, and came away at noon with nothing. He went back on the 11th of November, and came away with a written confession sworn before Dr. Craik, vicar of Haricot and a justice of this county, in which William Merritt, clerk, deposed that on the 2nd day of September last his master had brought him 3 old receipts in a young lady's hand, and had directed him to copy that hand upon a half-sheet from the office drawer, and had dictated the words, that he had done it, and had been given £5 and a promise, that he had known it to be wrong, and had believed it to be nothing worse than a lawyer's trick in a suit, and that he wished it upon the note that his sister at Ripon was maintained by him, and by nobody else in the world. Ambrose read the confession, and then wrote to Turnwell to say that the sister at Ripon was to be maintained out of the Dunmere account from Christmas, whatever became of Merritt, and that this was not to be communicated to Merritt or to anybody else until the case was over, since a witness who has been given a present is worth nothing. Then he went at the money, which was the dullest part and the part that mattered. Amos Grigg, woolstapler of Leeds, turned out to be 60, chapel, deaf in one ear, and as straight as a plumb line, and profoundly annoyed. He came over to Dunmere on the 20th of November, sat in the muniment room, looked at the abstracts for 3 hours with his spectacles pushed up on his forehead, and then said the sentence upon which the whole suit finally turned. "He told me it were advanced in one sum," said Amos Grigg. "Cash, over the counter at Kirkby Marl the 14th of March. I asked him twice, because 2,300 is 2,300, and I have it in his own letter, and I have brought the letter." He put it on the table. "Now your grace shows me a lady's wine bill paid quarterly, and a hunter bought at Ripon and 9 weeks of lodgings at Harrogate, and it comes, by my reckoning of it, to a shade over £1,100 spread across 2 year. That is not an advance, your grace. That is an allowance. I have been sold a security got up out of an allowance, and I have paid £2,400 of my own money for it, and if that is the way attorneys go on in this county, I shall be glad to be back in Leeds." "Mr. Grigg," said Ambrose, "you will lose nothing. I will undertake that now, in writing, whatever the court does, every farthing you paid will be found, if not by Mr. Dowd, then by me." Grigg looked at him for a moment with his spectacles up. "Nay," he said, "I'll take it off him, thank you kindly, and I'll stand up and say so. There's a lass in this been used shameful." He put his letter back in his pocket. "My own girl died at 19, your grace. I don't hold with it." They were examined at York on the 4th of December, before commissioners, in a long cold room over the Guildhall with a fire that smoked, and it took 2 days, and there was not one dramatic word said in the whole of it, and Ambrose Carew found it the most savagely satisfying event of his life. That is how such things are done. Nobody shouts. A man in a black gown asks a papermaker about the soldering of wires in a mold for 50 minutes, until the room is glassy with boredom, and then he asks him one more question, and after that the exhibit is dead and everybody in the room knows it, and the notes are read back, and they break for dinner. The order of it was this: Mr. Ellerby and the molds, and Mr. Bowes the stationer of Kirkby Marl, who produced his day-book to show that the office of Mr. K. Dowd, attorney, had bought 2 reams of Ellerby laid in the July before last. The confession of William Merritt, clerk, and Merritt himself, grey to the lips, examined for an hour and a half, who did not vary in a syllable. Bessie Kell, aged 73, who was asked whether she was in the pay of the Duke of Dunmere, and said yes. £18 a year and nothing to do for it, and I'd have come from thirst on my knees to say what I've said, and who described a man carried down to a small parlor in a chair, and ink on the side of the left little finger, and who was cross-examined for 40 minutes about her dismissal and her wages and her spite, and who at the end of it said, "Sir, I washed that man's hand and he cried, and you may make what you like of an old woman, but you'll not make me forget that." Thomas Fenwick, coachman, now in the service of Miss Selina Carew of Thirst, who had been second footman at Vale House, and who had carried one end of the chair, and who deposed that his master could not lift the right hand at all, and that Mr. Dowd had put the pen into the left, and that Sir Osric Pry had held the wrist steady, and that he had been given a guinea afterward, and told it was for the trouble of the chair. The accounts, 11 days of them, read in by an examiner in a flat voice. The wine, the hunter, the mantua-maker, the lodgings, £1,094, 6 shillings and 3pence, against 2,300 sworn. Amos Grigg and Dowd's letter. And Clemency, Duchess of Dunmere, examined on the second morning for 2 hours and 11 minutes. He had known she would be there. Turnwell had had her deposition since November, sworn at Sedgewater Home, and the other side had insisted on examining her, because they had no choice left but to try to break her. He had not known where she would sit. She came in at 10 with Jane Frierson's mother beside her, in the grey silk, 4 miles of that county's mud on the hem of it, and no attempt made to hide the fact. And she took a chair at the far side of the room from him, and inclined her head to him exactly once, as she would have done to a stranger of great rank, and held it a full second. They went at her for 2 hours. They put the forged letter into her hands and asked her whether it was her writing, and she said, "It is a very good copy of my writing, and it is written upon paper that did not exist when I am said to have written it. And if you will look at the 7th word, you will see that whoever copied my hand did not know that I never join a T to an H." They asked her whether she had been in the Duke of Dunmere's employment. She said yes, at £40 a year, upon written articles, and she had them with her. They asked whether she had married him. She said yes, in September, against her own advice, and to his credit. They asked, at last, in the voice they had been saving, whether it was not the case that she had come out of that house in February a servant, and had come into this room a duchess, and whether the court was to believe that the whole of this suit was not the work of the man who had made her one. And Clemency Vale said, "Sir, I copied the memorandum of that mortgage at Kirkby Marle in December, for 1 3d on a carrier's cart, 6 weeks before I had ever spoken to the Duke of Dunmere in my life, and the clerk's initials are at the foot of it, and it is Exhibit 4. Everything that has been proved in this room these 2 days was in that memorandum. His Grace has paid for the proving of it. He did not invent it. He could not have invented it. He had never heard of Sedgewater Home except as a place where the drainage is bad." Ambrose looked at the table in front of him for some time after that. The commissioner's report went up to London on the 9th of December, and the thing did not end on a single afternoon, because equity does not end that way. It ended in pieces over 5 months, and each piece came in a letter. The mortgage of Sedgewater Home and the Fell Foot lime kilns was declared void as against the trust, and set aside, the power of attorney being found to be no act of Bartholomew Vale. Mr. Amos Grigg was declared entitled to be repaid £2,400 by Kestrel Dowd personally, with interest and costs, and got every penny of it in July. Dowd's house at Haricot, and the office, and the yellow-wheeled gig being sold in the month of June. Kestrel Dowd was struck off the roll of attorneys in the Hillary term, and a prosecution for forgery was commenced against him in the spring, upon which Ambrose was advised that he need do nothing further. And the further proceedings were reported in the York papers in a paragraph of 11 lines, and he read them once and did not keep the paper. William Merritt, clerk, was not prosecuted, upon the recommendation of the court, and went to Ripon and kept his sister, and Ambrose received 1 letter from him a year which he answered every time. The petition touching the infant Aurelia Ann Caro was dismissed with costs in February, the Lord Chancellor's master observing that the 8 paragraphs of it, though accurate in form, had been laid before the court in a manner which he must call disingenuous. And the 2 Caro cousins who had signed it wrote extremely long letters in March, which were burnt unread in the Munimintrum grate by the 17th Duchess of Dunmere in person, one at a time, with some ceremony. Sir Osric Pry, Bart., was removed from the commission of the peace of that county in the following April by the Lord Lieutenant, without a reason being given publicly, and continued to be master of the ceremonies at the Haricot assemblies for 2 years, in a room that grew steadily emptier, and then gave it up. And Sabra Vale, widow, was left in a house that was not hers, with 300 a year charged upon an estate whose rent she had spent in advance, and a brother off the bench, and a debt to a Leeds woolstapler that was not hers to pay, but whose story every soul in the North Riding now knew. Ambrose went to Vale House about that in January, once, alone, and was not received, and left a paper with the servant Fenna at the door. It had been written by his wife at Sedgewater Home and copied by him, and it offered Mrs. Sabra Vale, for her life, the cottage at Fell Foot with the garden and the 2 fields, and £80 a year, charged upon the Sedgewater lands by deed, the conditions being that she should not come within the parish of Dunmere and should not write to her grace. She took it in March. She lived at Fell Foot 11 years and never wrote, and Ambrose Carew never afterward heard his wife say one word about her, in temper or in triumph, and understood that this was not forgiveness, which clemency did not claim, but something harder and more useful, an account closed and the book put on the shelf. He went to Sedgewater home on the 11th of December, which was the day the commissioner's notes were closed, and he went without sending word. The old house had 4 rooms with a roof and 1 with a fire, and there was a physic garden dug in what had been the kitchen court, with the frost on it, and a bench against the south wall out of the wind, and she was on the bench in a shawl with her boots muddy to the ankle, having walked, he learnt later, from a cottage 2 miles off where a man had a leg wound she did not like the look of. Ambrose came round the corner of the wall and stopped. 9 weeks, said Clemency Vale. 9 weeks and 3 days, said Ambrose. Ellerby and Son, papermakers of Otley, put the year in the mold. That is the whole of it. That is what the entire machine was broken upon. A man in Otley soldering wires into a frame at Christmas in 1817. She sat looking at him. Then she put her face in her hands, and he crossed the frozen garden and sat down on the bench beside her and put his arms round her, and they were there a considerable time without saying anything, and a robin came and worked along the dug bed at their feet, entirely unconcerned. "Aurelia," she said at last, into his coat. "Dismissed with costs. She stays where she is until she chooses to go somewhere better, and she has informed me that she does not consider Mr. Nathaniel Pry somewhere better, and that she means to keep the Sedge Head dispensary book herself when you are too grand for it." "I shall never be too grand for it." "You will be much too grand for it," said Ambrose. "You are the Duchess of Dunmere, and there are 400 acres of water meadow and 2 lime kilns to be got in hand, and Halloway says the kilns have not been drawn properly since 1814, and is extremely excited about it." She laughed wetly. "Then I am not ruined." "You were never ruined," said Ambrose Carew. "You were robbed, which is a different thing and can be undone, and it took a papermaker, a jeweler of 81, a nurse of 73, a Leeds wool stapler, a clerk with a sister at Ripon, a country vicar with a temper, a quarry captain who offered £50 he had not got, and a girl on a carrier's cart with 1 and 3pence. He took her hands, both of them, cold and muddy and cracked at the knuckles from the stillroom, and turned them over. "And a duke at the last, who was of some little use, come home. Dunmere. I have the ring in my pocket," he said, "and I have had it in my pocket since the 18th of October, and I have taken it out perhaps 400 times, and I should like to put it back on your hand in that garden or in this one, and I should like it to be understood by every soul from Haricot to Kirkby Marl that it was put down for a season by your choice, and taken up again by your choice, and that no court and no cousin and no whisper by any window had the smallest thing to do with it." Clemency Vale looked at the frozen physic garden for a moment, and then held out her left hand. "This garden," she said, "it is the first thing that was ever mine." They were at Dunmere by dark. 3 years later, on a Wednesday in May, the Duke of Dunmere came out of the muniment room at 11 in the morning with a letter from Turnwell about a drainage award, and went looking for his wife, and did not find her in the still-room, where there were now 2 women working and a girl to label, nor in the still-cold north parlor that had been made into an office for the Sedge Head accounts, where Aurelia Carew, 20, sat with the dispensary book and a bad pen, nor in the long gallery. He found her in the physic garden on the south side of the Abbey, which had been a gravel court since 1794, and was now 400 square yards of beds and gravel walks, and a wall trained with quinces, sitting on the ground, which she was not supposed to do, with her sleeves pinned and her bonnet off in the sun, showing a very small person in a Holland pinafore how to pull a weed and not the thing next to it. He stood in the archway and watched them for a while without announcing himself. There were bells being rung badly in the village, because it was the anniversary of the dispensary, and because Sedgehead would ring bells for anything at all now, given the least encouragement. There was a smell of turned earth and lemon balm. On the wall behind her, at the corner, a slate had been let into the stone with a line cut in it by the quarry's letter-cutter, who had again done it in his own time and again would not be paid. An SCDGWATER, HER Physic. Ambrose Carow, who had been called the coldest man in the North Riding by people who meant it as a compliment, leaned in the archway of his own house and thought about a woman standing in the middle of a flooded gateway in February with a bandbox in her arms, refusing, with perfect courtesy, to get out of the rain. "Dunmere," said his wife, without turning round, "there is a drainage letter in your hand, and you have been in that doorway a full minute." "There is a drainage award of 11 acres at Fell Foot," said Ambrose, "and it can wait until Friday." "Can it?" "It can wait," said the Duke of Dunmere, "until the 16th of Never," and put the letter in his pocket and went down the step into the sun.